Hello, and welcome to Echoes of the Forgotten Earth, a place where curiosity curls up like a cat by the fire and questions drift slowly, like unhurried clouds slipping across a midnight sky. Tonight, we're wandering back to a time older than history itself, into the dim and flickering light of memory. You may want to get comfortable now. Lower the lights, straighten your pillow, pull the blanket a little closer, because this journey reaches far beyond pyramids and parchments, beyond emperors and calendars, to an age when the world was mostly wilderness and stories were the only tools we had to remember who we were. Before we begin, let me ask you something. When you were young, was there ever a story that felt different from the rest? Not just a bedtime tale or fairy story, but something deeper. A tale that made your imagination feel like it was brushing against a truth too old and too large to fully name. Maybe it was a story about a world-drowning flood, or shining visitors who descended from the sky, or a radiant age when people spoke directly with the stars. Wherever you are right now, let that story come to mind for a moment. Think of the way it made you feel. What if that story wasn't only a myth at all? What if it was a memory? If these quiet explorations soothe you, these gentle spirals into wonder, then you might consider liking this video or subscribing to this drowsy little corner of science. It helps us drift out to other late-night thinkers, people who find peace in questions rather than answers. Take a slow breath. Let's start this journey together, in that liminal space between archaeology and dream, where legend might be history blurred by the mist of forgetting. Because tonight, we're circling around a question that has followed humanity for as long as we have been able to form questions at all. What if the oldest myths are not fiction, but memories echoes of a civilization that existed before everything we currently call history? Humans have been storytellers for a very long time, long before letters were shaped into words, before anyone carved symbols into stone or pressed ink into reeds and scrolls. We had our voices. We had them around the embers of fires, in the hollows of caves, under night skies whose constellations did not yet have names. We spoke to each other about where we came from and what the world had once been. Those earliest storytellers were not authors in the modern sense. They were rememberers. When they spoke of gods stepping down from clouds or of cities swallowed up by the sea, they might not have been inventing at all. They were repeating. The specific details could change with each new telling. Names shifted, settings moved, metaphors grew, but something in the framework of those tales remained insistent, stubborn, impossible to erase. That's the strange quality of myth. It has a pulse. Beneath all the flourishes, beneath the exaggerations and metaphors, there is often a rhythm that feels grounded, like a fossil pressed not into rock, but into narrative. Across continents that never traded goods, across cultures that never shared a language, the same skeletal shapes of story appear. Civilizations separated by vast oceans somehow remembered a world ending in water, again and again, in eerily similar ways. They recalled beings who descended from the heavens and taught them how to cultivate, to measure, to build. They repeated tales of golden ages that ended in ruin, of towers striving too high, of fire raining from the sky, of oceans surging over cities and swallowing them whole. It's easy, and perhaps comforting, to wave these parallels away, to say, these are archetypes, universal symbols, reflections of the same human psychology. Perhaps they are, but sometimes the overlaps feel too detailed, too specific, to rest comfortably in coincidence. When stories from Sumer, from Mesoamerica, from Southeast Asia all speak of a world covered in water after sudden catastrophe, we might stop and wonder. Were our ancestors only remarkably imaginative, or were some of them trying very hard to remember something that had actually happened to them? Archaeologists sometimes talk about a blanket of cultural amnesia that covers prehistory. Writing is a very recent arrival, perhaps 5,000 years old. Agriculture is older, maybe 12,000. But beyond that, tens upon tens of thousands of years stretch behind us, quiet, unrecorded, silent, but not empty. Silence is not the same thing as nothing. The people who lived in those long ages before writing were not blank pages waiting politely for civilization to arrive. They built things. They carved and painted. They made music. Some of their creations still cling to the earth, weathered and half-buried. At Gobekli Tepe, for instance, great carved pillars older than the pyramids stand aligned to the stars with a precision that implies intention, planning, and a detailed understanding of the sky. Other works, no doubt, disappeared altogether, ground down by glaciers, drowned in surging seas, or simply eroded into anonymity by time. What if, somewhere in that vast unrecorded span, there was a civilization developed enough to plant the seeds of myths that would echo down through millennia? Not advanced in the way we tend to imagine, not in terms of silicon chips and orbiting satellites, but advanced in a different way, a seamless integration of observation, astronomy, architecture, and narrative. A way of living that wove knowledge into story so tightly that when the civilization itself was lost, fragments of its memory survived as legend. It's an unsettling idea, because it implies we might not be the first humans to gaze at the stars and wonder if we once understood them more intimately. It suggests that tales of Atlantis, of Lemuria, of gods strolling among mortals might be less invention and more afterimage. The last shimmering reflections of something our species truly experienced and could never entirely erase. When Plato wrote down the story of Atlantis, he did not present it as a fable of his own making. He insisted he was retelling an older Egyptian account, supposedly passed to the lawgiver Solon generations earlier. Those Egyptian priests, in turn, claimed they were only preserving what their own ancestors had lived through. A vast flood, the fall of an advanced people, the resetting of the world. Myths like that are not rare. They're everywhere. From the tales of the sunken land of Kumari Kandam in Tamil tradition to the stories of flood survivors among the Hopi, the Maori, and many others, humanity seems to be collectively remembering something overwhelming, something that changed everything. Could so many different peoples have independently imagined the same kind of disaster? It's possible. Human fears are shared, and imagination travels easily. But there is another possibility, that our ancestors really did live through global events, melting ice sheets, abrupt sea level rises, comet impacts, and they carried what they had seen the only way they could, by turning it into story. Myth may well be our oldest form of data storage. It doesn't archive information in columns of numbers or lines of script, but in symbol, rhythm, character, and metaphor. A flood story might not be solely a moral warning. It might also be a memory of the end of the last ice age, when glaciers melted and the oceans rose by hundreds of feet, drowning continental shelves and coastal plains that may have been home to flourishing communities. Details like survivors floating in boats, animals taken aboard in pairs, rain that falls unceasingly for days or weeks. These might be narrative shorthand for realities too large and terrifying for early language to capture with precision. A vast catastrophe, compressed into images that could be remembered. And then we have the sky beings. Almost every culture tells of figures who descend from above, sometimes bringing tools, sometimes bringing laws, sometimes quite literally fashioning humankind. The Sumerians spoke of the Anunnaki. The Dogon people of Mali told of the Nomo, amphibious teachers associated with the star Sirius. The Maya remembered gods who arrived from the heavens in radiant vessels. Aboriginal Australians told of star ancestors who came down to sculpt the land. We tend to interpret all of this as religious symbolism, divine imagery, not description. But if myths are, at least in part, memories, then another possibility opens. Maybe these stories recall encounters not necessarily with extraterrestrials, but with the last survivors of an earlier human world. People whose knowledge was so far beyond that of the hunter-gatherers they found that they might as well have been gods. If a sophisticated civilization had flourished once and then collapsed, its survivors could indeed have seemed divine to the cultures that arose later. Picture a small group of such survivors carrying the last living fragments of expertise in navigation, in astronomy, in surveying and construction, into a world that had largely forgotten such things. Imagine them teaching farming where there had only been foraging, demonstrating how to shape stone or map the stars to people who had no concept that such feats were possible. Within a few generations, the stories about those teachers would blur into something sacred. They would become gods. The physical traces of such a lost world, if it existed, are fragmentary at best. We find old maps that appear to show coastlines as they would have looked prior to the end of the Ice Age. We find megalithic structures oriented with astonishing astronomical precision, built by cultures we once thought too primitive to have cared about such alignments. We find myths that describe stars invisible to the naked eye, or celestial events that modern astronomy can date to periods long before the civilizations that recorded them. None of this, taken individually, proves the existence of a forgotten civilization. But when you begin to assemble the pieces, the whole picture starts to look less like fantasy and more like a faint pattern, a design smudged by time, but still recognizable if you squint. The notion of an earlier, more advanced culture predating the known ancient world is not new. From Plato's speculation to the work of contemporary writers like Graham Hancock, from the musings of early explorers to the cautious curiosity of some modern researchers, people have been searching for traces of such a world for centuries. Some point to ruins submerged off the coasts of India and Japan, remnants of structures that now lie under the sea in areas that were dry land 12,000 years ago. Others focus on the uncanny precision of megalithic architecture, or on the seemingly sudden emergence of agriculture, mathematics, and written language, or on shared astronomical motifs scattered across civilizations that supposedly developed in isolation. Each clue, taken alone, is ambiguous. But myth has a peculiar way of threading these fragments into a larger tapestry of possibility. Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of all this is the way memory itself functions. Human memory is messy. It fades, compresses, distorts. Over generations, it reshapes itself. When traditions are spoken rather than written and passed from one storyteller to another hundreds of times, the literal facts blur, dissolve, and mutate. But the underlying form of the story remains. A flood can gradually become a punishment from the gods. A vanished island can become a cautionary parable. Yet beneath this evolving symbolism, a core experience stays lodged in place like a bone inside a fossil. Modern neuroscience tells us that intense emotional experiences imprint themselves more deeply than ordinary days. Catastrophes, upheavals, sudden losses, they carve grooves into personal and collective memory. If our distant ancestors experienced the collapse of a great civilization, it makes perfect sense that the echo of that trauma would survive. It would be reshaped into story, wrapped in myth, and carried across continents as both warning and remembrance. But there's another reason these stories endure. Myths often step in where physical evidence fails. When people thousands of years ago came upon enormous ruins or megalithic stones they could not imagine lifting themselves, they did what humans always do. They filled the gaps with narrative. The builders of these colossal works, they said, must have been giants, or gods, or beings superior to us in ways we can barely conceive. Maybe they were. Or perhaps those tales were our ancestors doing what we still do today, using story to remember people who were extraordinary, but not supernatural. Just gone. Some scholars and cognitive scientists have proposed that the human brain might actually be wired to preserve certain kinds of ancestral memory at a cultural level. We are exquisitely tuned to notice patterns, to recognize recurring structures and tales and symbols, and to pass them onward. We don't only transmit information through language, but also through ceremony, art, and repeated images. In this view, myths could be seen as an emergent form of long-term memory, a kind of intergenerational hard drive encoded in narrative and ritual. If that's the case, then what we casually classify as myths may not be merely fictions or morality plays. They might be the memory of humanity itself, compressed, filtered, simplified, and reinterpreted to survive wave after wave of forgetting. So when we hear of gods teaching writing, or cities shattered by divine fire, or people dispersed by some immense disaster, perhaps we are hearing more than metaphor. Perhaps we are catching glimpses of history that predates history. Maybe myth is the way civilization speaks in its sleep, half dreaming, half remembering what came before dawn. There is something deeply humbling in that possibility. It shrinks the supposed gulf between legend and memory. It implies that even in our earliest, most precarious days, our species was capable of remembering across thousands of years of turning survival into story, and story into identity. It also suggests that if there was a first civilization, it never quite vanished. Its walls and monuments might have fallen, its written knowledge might have scattered into dust, but its essence survived in words. Every time we tell a story about beginnings and endings, about water and fire, about light and darkness, we may be unknowingly echoing their final attempt to explain themselves. The more we entertain that idea, the more reasonable it becomes that myths did not arise from imagination alone, but from a desperate effort to preserve truth in the only durable medium our ancestors had when everything tangible had been taken away. Because if your cities are lost, your tools destroyed, and even your language begins to erode, what's left? Stories spoken, sung, chanted, repeated, until they become timeless. That may be why these old tales still move us in a way we can't quite rationalize. Deep within, we recognize them. We feel their familiarity, not merely because we've read them in books or seen them adapted in films, but because they've been murmured along our ancestral line, passed mouth to ear through uncounted generations until at last they reached us. They belong to the same mind that first looked up at the stars and felt not fear, but home. As we continue, we'll follow those echoes further, through floods that refuse to die, stones that seem to contradict their own age, and symbols that might be quiet messages from a forgotten past. We won't rush. We'll wander slowly, listening for whatever the old stories still want us to hear. If myth is memory, then somewhere, in that long twilight before written history, there must have been a turning point. A moment when remembering became matter of survival. A time when it wasn't enough to know where to find food or how to fashion shelter. When the difference between life and oblivion depended on whether people could hold on to something less tangible. The knowledge of what came before. Imagine a world without cities, no metal tools, no permanent roads. Your horizon is your calendar. The stars are your clock. The seasons are your teachers. Firelight washes gently over the faces of small bands of people huddled close, and then the stories begin. These are the tales that must be told, over and over, so that what has been learned is not lost. This is not civilization, as we usually define it. There are no palaces, no stone libraries, no names carved in clay. But there is intelligence, there is complex language, there is an emerging awareness that knowledge is fragile, that if it is not carried carefully, it can die. That awareness is what makes this early period so haunting. It's the invisible foundation under everything that came after. The people of that time, our ancestors, did not have textbooks or archives, but they had memory. And in those memories, the first sparks of civilization glowed. Archaeologists find embers of that deep memory scattered around the globe, finely made stone tools shaped with delicate intention, burial sites laid out with ritual care, cave paintings that seem to tremble with motion and layered meaning. Each fragment is evidence of minds that were not merely surviving, but wondering, arranging, imagining. The painted caves of Lascaux in France, created roughly 17,000 years ago, are not the hesitant work of an animal barely awake to itself. They are the work of artists. The horses, bulls, and deer hurtling across those walls are more than decoration. They are language without letter symbols, heavily charged with purpose. Look closely, and you can almost feel a bridge stretching from instinct toward intellect. The people who made those images were watching patterns. They were noticing cycles and relationships. They knew the seasons, the migrations, the turning dome of the sky. They could anticipate when herds would move, when rivers would swell, when the moon would vanish and return. And perhaps most importantly, they could remember. To remember across generations is a kind of technology, not a physical instrument, but a structure of thought that lets knowledge survive its creator. At some point in this long, shadowy era, humans discovered that words could outlast the lips that spoke them. They realized that spoken memory could be passed onward like a torch. Once that realization took root, myth became more than entertainment. It became an engine of survival. Now picture that same capacity to encode experience into story used for something larger than tracking animals or seasons, used instead to preserve the memory of an entire way of life. If a civilization had existed before the one we recognize, its fall would have demanded storytellers. If its cities were drowned, if its mountains burned, someone would have needed to explain to the children what had happened. There would have been no ink, no carved tablets, only the language of images and feeling, gods and floods, darkness and light, destruction and rebirth. Those would become the myths we hold today. Around 12,000 years ago, something extraordinary shifted. The earth began to warm. The last ice age loosened its grip. Glaciers receded, and sea levels climbed with startling speed. Climatologists refer to a tumultuous slice of this transition as the Younger Dryas boundary, a period marked by dramatic climatic swings, sudden floods, and wild weather. For those who were alive then, it must have seemed that the world itself was breaking open. Tundra gave way to forest. Familiar animals migrated or vanished. Whole coastlines slipped beneath the advancing sea. It's little wonder that so many of the oldest myths speak of water and ruin. They may not be allegories at all. They may be field reports, eyewitness accounts, retold by survivors. What we file under mythology might simply be humanity doing what it has always done, processing the shock of global trauma through narrative, trying to make sense of the loss of everything known. In the midst of this upheaval, small groups of people would have clung to those rare places where conditions remained relatively stable. Archaeological sites like Gobekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey suggest that structured, organized societies existed much earlier than we used to think possible. There, immense stone pillars carved with animals and enigmatic symbols stand in carefully arranged circles. Some of these monoliths weigh many tons, yet they were raised by people we still often label hunter-gatherers. Gobekli Tepe is over 11,000 years old, older than Stonehenge, older than the first cities of Mesopotamia. It is as though someone, somewhere, remembered how to build on a monumental scale and decided to do so again. Where did that knowledge come from? Why, after tens of thousands of years during which human shelters remained small and tools relatively simple, do we suddenly see vast symbolic structures, aligned precisely with the sky, emerging almost overnight? It's a question that continues to trouble archaeology. One possibility is that the people who built these early monuments were not starting from nothing. They were rebuilding. They were trying, with the fragments they still held, to restore pieces of a nearly lost tradition. The myths that grow up around later civilizations carry the same echo. They speak of gods teaching architecture, agriculture, writing, and astronomy, deities descending from above to instruct humanity in the arts of living in organized societies. Strip away the sacred imagery for a moment, and what remains? Teachers, survivors, people who knew things others did not. If a great civilization fell, and a few of its members endured, this is exactly how their knowledge would seep back into the world, not as a full manual, but as scattered lessons, retold until memory blurred them into legend. Imagine those survivors moving through a landscape scarred by calamity. Rivers bloated with meltwater, forests scorched black, air still hazy with soot and dust. To the scattered bands they encountered, they would have seemed almost beyond human, bearers of lost skills, guardians of forbidden arts, and perhaps Long after they themselves were gone, the tribes that had once learned from them remembered, reshaping their image into stories of gods who descended to teach humanity how to live. Fire itself may have been the first and brightest symbol of this kind of memory. It is one of our oldest companions and one of our strongest metaphors. Fire destroys, but it also preserves. It hardens clay, tempers metal, and holds back the dark. For early humans, fire was a living boundary, the thin line between safety and the unknown. It was the first tool that changed not just how we survived, but how we imagined. Around the flames, people shared knowledge, sang, recited, and retold what their elders had told them. Fire became a teacher, an intimate companion, and quite possibly a living reminder of some even older inheritance. When anthropologists examine early myths about fire, they find patterns that hint at more than a simple discovery. Many of these stories say that fire was not found, but given stolen from the gods, brought down from the heavens, or granted by a divine intermediary. In Greek myth, Prometheus defies Olympus to deliver fire to humankind. In Polynesian traditions, the trickster hero Maui steals fire from a guardian goddess to bring warmth to the world. Among the Navajo, sacred beings send animals to capture fire so that humans might have it. Again and again, fire is not stumbled upon by accident. It is bestowed. That recurring detail might preserve a faint memory of contact of knowledge shared between different groups, or of something much older being rediscovered and ceremonially reintroduced. If we treat fire in these stories as a symbol of civilization itself, of warmth, illumination, and knowledge, then the myth of its gifting begins to sound like an echo of the moment when lost understanding was returned. The fire before history may not refer only to literal flame, but to the light of comprehension rekindled after a prolonged darkness. We know we are not the first species to use tools, but we are the first to use them to extend memory. Stone, wood, pigment, and flame all became vessels for thought. By the time humans began taming plants and animals, we were already intentionally reshaping our surroundings. We built shrines, painted constellations, buried our dead with care and offerings. These behaviors point to a consciousness of time, not just existing in the present, but looking backward and forward, remembering the past, anticipating the future. In that sense, the first civilization might not have been a single city, nor a single kingdom at all. It may have been more like a web of loose network of human communities linked not by roads or empires, but by shared knowledge and overlapping memory. A civilization of thought rather than of stone, spanning continents in the minds of those who carried embers and stories wherever they went. Archaeological clues hint at this possibility. Stone tools from Africa and the Middle East share strikingly similar design principles, despite being separated by thousands of kilometers. Cave art from Europe to Indonesia uses many of the same recurring signs: dots, spirals, handprints. It is as if people across vast distances were speaking dialects of the same visual language. This doesn't prove direct contact, but it strongly suggests a shared origin, a deep inheritance of symbols that may trace back to a time before cultures diverged as sharply as they later did. It's uncanny to realize that we can still see echoes of that shared symbolic language in the modern world. Take the spiral. It recurs everywhere. In Celtic carvings, in Mayan reliefs, in Aboriginal rock art, in Hindu yantras. It stands for motion, for energy, for cycles, and unfolding a concept older than formal philosophy. How is it that the same motif arises across the world, again and again? Some say it's simple. Spirals occur in nature, in shells and whirlpools and galaxies. Of course, people would notice them and copy them. That's plausible. But it may also be that the spiral is one of the last surviving traces of a much older system of meaning, a fragment of visual memory handed down so long that we no longer know its original source. Viewed this way, history stops looking like a straight line of progress and starts looking more like a series of recoveries. Knowledge emerges, fades, and then re-emerges, like a fire being coaxed back to life from nearly dying coals. The myth of a first civilization may point not to a single sunken city, but to a pattern etched deeply into the human story. Our tendency to forget and remember in cycles, to lose what we know, then later rediscover it as legend, as inspiration, as sudden genius. Some researchers believe this pattern might explain why civilization appears to burst into flower so rapidly after the Ice Age. Agriculture, writing, monumental architecture, formal astronomy, they all arise within a relatively tight window of time. Seen through the lens of pure innovation, it looks abrupt. But if we see it as recollection, it starts to feel different, as if humanity were waking up and remembering what it already, in some dim way, knew. In many respects, this is exactly what myths do. They rebuild. They patch the cracks left by catastrophe and forgetting. They allow us to reconstruct the outline of lost knowledge through stories that still retain its shape. Listening carefully to old tales, we hear hints of these reconstructions. The Sumerians spoke of kings who ruled before the Great Flood for impossibly long spans of time. The Egyptians recalled Zep Tepi the first time, when gods walked the earth and showed humans how to live. The Maya recorded cycles of creation and destruction, each ending in upheaval. The Greeks divided human history into ages of gold, silver, bronze, and iron, each a step further away from some vanished perfection. These myths might not describe literal ages in a chronological sense, but they may be reflecting repeating cycles of civilization, memory, and loss. To us, surrounded by digital backups and endless servers of data, the idea that an entire civilization could vanish from memory can feel absurd. But in a world without writing, where knowledge lived only in human minds and fragile rituals, it would not take much. A few generations of famine, a sequence of wars, a chain of floods and plagues, and the continuity would fracture. What remained would be shards coded into story. Names could change. Gods could shed one set of symbols and adopt another. But the core memory, if it was emotionally charged enough, would persist. It's also possible that some fragments survived in entirely practical form. Star charts, planting calendars, ratios for building. Techniques remembered as, this is the way it's done, long after the original reasons were forgotten. We see this pattern in ancient sites aligned with solstices and equinoxes, or in myths that appear to encode data about precession and eclipses. These are unlikely to be mere accidents. They imply deliberate preservation of information too subtle and complex to be explained by chance alone. Someone long before telescopes or modern instruments knew how to read the sky, and they taught others, not with textbooks, but with myth. Imagine that you wanted to preserve scientific knowledge for 10,000 years. You couldn't rely on your language remaining intact. Words shift, scripts disappear, but stories endure. If you wanted people in a distant future to know when to plant, how to track the heavens, how to anticipate certain cycles, you might hide that knowledge inside tales of gods and animals, embed it in seasonal rituals, repeated in songs tied to specific times of year. That seems to be precisely what our ancestors did. Myth was not clumsy, half-formed science. It was resilient science disguised as story, designed to withstand the erosion of ages. Maybe that's what the fire before history truly represents. Not literal flame, but the spark of preservation. The realization that narrative could function as technology. Before there were written numbers, before maps, before codified laws, humans invented continuity. They worked out how to keep meaning alive across lifetimes. It's sobering to think that every sentence we utter, every anecdote we share, might carry a faint trace of that original fire. The ancestral determination to keep the past alive long enough for it to become myth. We're still tending that flame now, in forms our ancestors could barely imagine. Through books, through videos and streams, through quiet voices speaking in the dark to unknown listeners. If those ancient myths are indeed memories, then what they preserve isn't only the shapes of cities or the echoes of disasters. They also remember the act of remembering itself. They remind us that civilization begins not with stone walls or complex tools, but with a decision to keep telling the story, to keep the fire going, even when the night feels long and everything familiar has been taken away. As we move further along this path, that's where we'll stay, close to the embers, watching them brighten as they reveal the first faint outlines of a world that might have been, and the memory that refused to die. Water remembers, not the way stone does, holding the exact shape of a carving or the weight of a wall, but in its own shifting language. It moves, and in that movement it carries traces of whatever it has touched before. When the world warmed at the end of the Ice Age, water began its long, patient rise. Glaciers melted, rivers swelled and altered their courses. Oceans crept inward, swallowing ancient shores. Everything humans had once built along those old coastlines slipped beneath the surface. What we now call the Great Flood might not have been a single event at all, but a chain of overlapping catastrophes. Surges and pulses of meltwater arriving in waves, relentless over centuries, erasing coastlines that had been home to people for generations. Every continent carries its own version of this flood story. Unlike some localized creation myths, this narrative is nearly global, a shared memory told in many voices. The Epic of Gilgamesh, etched into clay thousands of years ago, describes a deluge so immense that even the gods grow afraid. The Hebrew tale of Noah runs in close parallel. A chosen man warned, a great vessel built, animals gathered, waters rising, and a cleansed world waiting on the other side. In Hindu tradition, the god Vishnu warns Manu of an oncoming cosmic flood, telling him to build a boat and preserve the seeds of life. Greek myth remembers Deucalion and Pyrrha, who survive when Zeus drowns a corrupt world. In ancient China, stories tell of Gun and Yu grappling with unending waters for decades, fighting to bring the rivers back under control. Indigenous peoples across the Americas preserve their own flood memories, from the Hopi mesas to the Inca highlands to the coastal tribes of the Pacific Northwest. Even in Australia, a land old and predominantly dry, Aboriginal traditions recall seas rising and flooding low-lying plains thousands of years ago. We can choose to see all these as moral tales, warnings about arrogance, stories of purification, and new beginnings. But when so many distant cultures repeat such similar patterns, it becomes hard not to suspect that they began with the same kind of experience, a shared trauma told from different shores. During the last ice age, a vast fraction of the planet's water was imprisoned in ice. As the climate warmed, that frozen water had only one place to go. Sea levels climbed more than 100 meters, at first slowly, then in startling bursts, as immense ice sheets fractured and collapsed into the sea. Geologists have identified evidence of these bursts meltwater pulses when staggering amounts of water poured into the oceans not over millennia, but within years or decades. One such episode, around 12,000 years ago, may have raised global sea levels by several meters within a single human lifetime. For people living along coasts and river deltas, that would have been enough to make the world feel as though it were ending. Imagine standing where your ancestors had fished and farmed for generations, watching the tide inch farther inland each season. At first it might seem manageable. Fields shrink, but there is still higher ground. Then, one spring, far away, an ice wall breaks. Rivers explode beyond their banks. Storms intensify. Within weeks, the sea has surged forward. The sky is a curtain of rain. The earth shakes. The air turns sharp with salt. You and your family climb uphill as the water devours everything behind you. When you finally look back, your world is simply gone. Those who survived would tell that story. They would remember water rising beyond comprehension, whether framed as divine judgment or cosmic grief. They would remember that a few were spared, that something of life endured, that the world began again from almost nothing. They would speak of boats, real or symbolic, built to save what little could be saved. As the centuries passed, these memories would settle and harden into myth. The flood that ended one world and began another. Modern geology and oceanography quietly confirm pieces of these old stories. In the region of the Black Sea, for instance, scientists have found indications that around 7,600 years ago, rising Mediterranean waters broke through what is now the Bosporus, pouring violently into a lower-lying freshwater lake and transforming it into the saltwater sea we know today. For people living on those shores, it would have been terrifying. A sudden, roaring wall of water claiming their homes. Similar hints surface in other parts of the globe. Submerged architectural remains off the coasts of India, Japan, and the Bahamas. Ancient riverbeds now lying hundreds of meters below the ocean surface. Traces of fires, hearths, and habitation on lands that are today drowned. If we think of myths as a kind of deep cultural memory, then these flood stories might represent localized perspectives on a broad, global transition. Each culture preserved its own piece of the upheaval, its own stretch of shoreline, its own wave of water filtered through symbols and sacred language, so those memories could survive. In that sense, the flood is not only about punishment and renewal, it is about loss. Loss on a scale so vast that it changed what it meant to be human. The loss of familiar landscapes, of ways of life, of entire worlds of meaning. Underneath the allegories, many of these stories might be whispering the same warning. Remember what happened when we failed to stay in balance with the earth. Remember what the world can do when we treat stability as guaranteed. Flood myths also intertwine with another ancient theme, the memory of a golden age that ended. Almost everywhere, you find some recollection of a time when life was easier, when humans lived in closer harmony with nature, when wisdom was common, not rare, and then something broke. The flood in that reading is not just physical water. It is the boundary between that remembered age and ours, the line where the memory of the first civilization sinks. When Plato described Atlantis, he placed it beyond the Pillars of Hercules out, past the Strait of Gibraltar in the Atlantic. He painted it as a powerful and cultured island realm, rich in knowledge and resources, that fell out of alignment with the divine and was destroyed by earthquakes and floods in a single day and a night of misfortune. He insisted he was not inventing the tale, but repeating an Egyptian account already ancient in his time. Egyptian records themselves speak of earlier worlds, cycles of creation and destruction. The Sumerians tell of ages before the flood. Aztec codices preserve sequences of suns' worlds created and wiped away. Polynesian chants recall lands submerged and ancestors driven across the sea. The pattern is repetitive in a way that feels deliberate. The world ends. The waters rise. A few survive and begin again. It's possible that all these cycles are local metaphors, separate and symbolic. But it's equally plausible that they are many windows onto the same turning point in human experience. The period when the last surviving traces of a pre-Ice Age world, however advanced it was, finally disappeared. When the seas rose, they didn't just claim land. They erased maps. They obliterated paths. They buried evidence under salt and silt and darkness. What remains to us now are hints. Off the western coast of India, near what is now Dwarka, divers have found what appear to be walls, terracing, and roads. Not natural formations, but structured and geometric, lying beneath the Arabian Sea. The age of these remains is still debated, but some suggest traces of human occupation there more than 9,000 years ago, predating the Indus Valley cities by millennia. Near Yonaguni in Japan, a series of underwater steps, terraces, and angular formations have inspired years of argument. Are they the product of geology alone? Or are they the eroded bones of a man-made complex? If the latter is true, then they belong to a time when those rocks were above sea level, long before the traditional dates for Japanese civilization. Further inland, far from any ocean, there is also evidence of immense ancient floods. In the American Pacific Northwest, the scablands of Washington state, their gorges and ripples and massive dry waterfalls tell the story of glacial dams breaking and releasing unimaginable torrents. In the Middle East, sediment layers in ancient river plains speak of sudden inundations that reshaped the land. All of this suggests that the end of the Ice Age was not a gentle thaw, but a chaotic, water-driven reordering of the planet. Whether it came in one legendary flood or a series of fierce surges hardly matters to those who lived through it. To them, the effect was the same. Everything familiar drowned. Seen in this light, the flood tales start to look less like spiritual parables and more like emotional reports. They do not measure how high the water rose or how fast. They measure impact, confusion, terror. The feeling that the ground had stopped being dependable and that some enormous, indifferent force was rewriting the world. They also cling stubbornly to something else. The idea that even after such devastation, some ember of humanity survived. A few people on a mountain or in a boat or guided by stars, carrying forward the memory of what had been lost, along with the seeds of what could be rebuilt. That, perhaps, is why the flood story never quite fades. It functions not only as history, but as a metaphor for every form of overwhelming change war, plague, cultural collapse. Each time the world is remade, we retell the same narrative. Everything was destroyed, and yet somehow we began again. Underneath all the water and wood and animals marched 2 by 2. The pattern is one of survival. But one question remains, persistent and sharp. If there truly was a first civilization, developed enough to leave its fingerprints on myths scattered across the globe, where was it? What shape did it take before the sea erased its coastlines? Some researchers look to the now submerged continental shelves, the broad, shallow lands that once surrounded today's continents when sea levels were far lower. These shelves connected what are now islands and peninsulas, linking Britain to mainland Europe, India to Southeast Asia, Siberia to Alaska. During the Ice Age, many of those regions would have been temperate, fertile, and attractive to human settlement. When the oceans rose, they vanished beneath tens of meters of water. If a sophisticated society had arisen in one of those coastal realms, most of its remains would now lie on the seafloor, beyond the easy reach of excavation. We would see only what survived on the higher ground, a few enigmatic monuments and myths, no longer obviously connected to any great coastal center. It's interesting that so many lost land stories describe places beyond the known coasts, mysterious islands to the west, shining cities swallowed by the sea, kingdoms at the edge of the world. These might not be pure fantasy. They might be dim, ancestral memories of real floodplains and shorelines that once existed and then disappeared. To those who fled inland, the ocean itself would become a grave marker, a shimmering boundary beneath which their old life lay buried. Those refugees would not have arrived empty-handed. They would have carried with them whatever they could: crops, tools, stories, and skills, farming knowledge, celestial lore, rituals that encoded practical information. These fragments could have been the seeds from which later river valley civilizations sprouted once the climate settled. In that view, what we call the rise of civilization after the Ice Age is not a new beginning at all, but a regermination, a second growth from older roots. That idea that our world did not spontaneously leap from simplicity to complexity, but was reborn by survivors, subtly shifts how we see ourselves. It frames humanity not as a miracle of sudden innovation, but as a species defined by resilience and remembering. We do not simply invent, we recover. Even our modern language carries this watery legacy. We speak of being washed clean, of starting with a blank slate, of rising from the wreckage, of turning the tide. Renewal and water are still tangled together in our metaphors, as if the memory of ancient floods still tints how we imagine change. What makes these ancient flood stories so durable is their universality. You don't need to understand glaciology or sea level curves to feel the dread of rising water. You don't need scientific vocabulary to know what it means to lose your home and rebuild on higher ground. The flood is an event anyone can understand, whether literal or symbolic, and that is why it lives so comfortably both in history and in our emotional lives. When scientists reconstruct paleo coastlines mapping where the sea once stood, they find scattered evidence that fits this picture. Stone tools and hearths not far from the edges of old shores, signs of settlements that would have been ideal for fishing and trade. Those people had to move when the water came. They had to remember the lands that vanished behind them. As they retreated inland and their descendants migrated further, the memory of those drowned places would have traveled with them. Over time, names would be forgotten. Directions would blur. The land itself, once specific, would become symbolic, an ark, a sacred mountain, a divine punishment, a covenant. The story would survive, altered but intact enough to carry the sensation of loss. There is a peculiar symmetry between what science now uncovers and what myth has been saying all along. Genetic studies, for example, tell us that all non-African human populations seem to descend from a relatively small group that lived about 70,000 years ago. Some researchers link this bottleneck to a massive volcanic eruption or other global stress, a near-extinction event our species barely survived. In mythic language, that's a kind of flood as well. Not water this time, but ash and darkness. Humanity nearly erased, then reborn from a few families. It doesn't prove that any specific story, Noah's Ark, or Utnapishtim's vessel, or Manu's boat, is literally accurate. But it shows that deep crises can leave scars not only in DNA, but in story. We don't always remember what happened in technical detail, but we remember the shape, the feeling of almost disappearing, the fragile astonishment of beginning again. Seen this way, the flood is more than a story about water. It is a mirror for the human experience itself. Every culture, every era, eventually faces its own version. A collapse, a plague, a war, a shattering transformation. Each time, there is destruction. Each time, someone survives. Each time, someone tells the tale. The flood that refuses to die is not only the one that drowned the old coasts, it is the pattern that keeps returning, generation after generation, to remind us that survival is memory in motion. That telling and retelling the story is itself a kind of ark, a vessel carrying fragments of the old world into whatever comes next. As those ancient waters recede in our imagination, another landscape begins to appear. A world of builders and watchers, of people who measured shadows and stars long before we relearned how. Their traces linger in stone, in symbols, in the myths we still whisper. We'll follow those traces now, into the places where sky and earth seem to touch the realms of the old gods who, legends say, descended from above to teach what even the flood could not entirely erase. After the waters drew back and the land relaxed into its new outlines, the world must have looked both recognizable and strangely altered. Forests crept over landscapes that had once been open and cold. Rivers cut new channels through loosened soil. The contours of continents, though familiar to us now, were new to those who walked them. For the people who survived, it would have felt like waking into a second creation, quieter, but charged with the memory of what had just been lost. They would have looked up at the same stars their ancestors had once used to guide boats along now drowned coasts. But those constellations now shone above different horizons. The geography had changed, but the sky had not. The ground had shifted beneath their feet, but the heavens remained a constant, slow-turning dome. That may have been the moment when humanity began to look upward, not only for direction, but for origin. In the oldest myths, those that feel as if they stretch back into prehistory itself, the gods almost always come from above. They descend on shafts of light, on thunderclouds, on fiery chariots, or shimmering crafts. They are teachers and builders. They bring with them the skills that mark the beginning of settled life. Agriculture, measurement, writing, architecture, the reading of the stars. To those watching from below, these appearances must have looked like miracles. To the generations who retold the stories, they transformed gradually into metaphors. But at their root, what if they are memories? It's obvious why early people would associate wisdom with the sky. The heavens were the one element of their environment that seemed stable through all the chaos. Floods tore at the land, forests moved, animals vanished, even mountains crumbled. But each night, the same configurations of light returned in their slow, methodical patterns. To trace the stars was to find order in a world that had recently proven just how fragile order could be. The sky became the first great library, a calendar, a compass, a clock. Those who learned its language would have gained enormous power, the ability to predict seasons, track migrations, anticipate floods, and navigate featureless plains and oceans. They became keepers of time and space. To others, they might have seemed half divine. Yet the oldest sky myths are strikingly specific. In Sumer, one of the earliest known civilizations, the Anunnaki deities from heaven to earth were said to have taught humans cultivation, measurement, and metalwork. In Mesoamerica, the god Quetzalcoatl arrives from the sky or across the sea and gives people maize, counting systems, and writing. In Egypt, Thoth is credited with inventing mathematics and hieroglyphs, a gift from the divine mind. In Polynesian traditions, Tangaroa or other high gods descend to shape islands and teach navigation by the stars. These cultures were separated by entire oceans and vast stretches of time. Yet their stories rhyme, beings from above arriving to teach the same triad of skills: how to grow food, how to measure the earth, how to read the sky. One explanation is that human beings naturally assign their highest knowledge to the realm of gods. Another is that all of these myths may be distorted recollections of real events, not necessarily visits from extraterrestrials, but encounters with humans who were heirs to a deeper, older tradition. If a previous civilization had developed sophisticated ways of observing and measuring the world, and if a few of its members had survived the floods and moved among less advanced groups, they would easily have been mythologized. Imagine someone walking into a village where no one knows how to build with stone, carrying knowledge of surveying, geometry, and crop cycles. To the villagers, that person would not just be a skilled teacher. They would be otherworldly. It's not only the arrival of such figures that links these myths, it's the content of their teachings. Again and again, across continents, the same gifts appear: agriculture, architecture, astronomy. These are the foundations of what we call civilization, and they show up almost simultaneously in widely scattered regions after the Ice Age. According to standard timelines, humans in the Fertile Crescent, the Indus Valley, the Yellow River Delta, Mesoamerica, and elsewhere all shifted from foraging to farming, built cities, and developed calendars within a few thousand years of each other. We tend to call this independent invention, but it may also be partial remembrance, a reintroduction of old knowledge into a young world. In that case, the so-called sky gods may not have been deities from distant stars, but human survivors with a store of inherited understanding. Their divinity would be relative, a measure of the immense gap between their capabilities and those of the communities they encountered. That might explain why the earliest great monuments we know, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the pyramids of Egypt, the stepped temples of Mesoamerica, all point upward. They are not only tombs or shrines, they are stone prayers, attempts to reconnect with the heavens where knowledge was said to have come from. Their builders aligned these structures with extraordinary precision. The Great Pyramid of Giza is oriented almost perfectly to the cardinal directions. Its layout seems to mirror certain stars in Orion's belt. In Mexico, the Avenue of the Dead at Teotihuacan follows a deliberate astronomical axis, and the city's major pyramids may chart a cosmic map on the ground. In Britain, Stonehenge marks the solstices and lunar cycles with uncanny accuracy. In the Sahara, even older stone circles at Nabta Playa mark star risings and seasonal changes. These alignments are not accidents. They reveal a consistent dedication to marrying Earth and sky using stone to trace celestial patterns. This suggests the presence of a method, of a body of knowledge about cycles and geometry that had time to develop long before our surviving texts begin. You don't leap from small huts to megastructures aligned with the cosmos without a history of careful observation and shared technique. And yet, from our perspective, it seems as if many ancient peoples did just that. The leap feels smaller if we consider it not as a sudden invention, but as a remembering. Survivors carrying a set of principles, fractions of a once full system into the new age. Local cultures would adopt, adapt, and embed those principles into their own sacred architecture. Over time, the human teachers would fade into god figures, and the practical knowledge they shared would become ritual, then religion, then myth. For the people of those early civilizations, the sky was more than a place of light. It was the visible face of order. To watch it was to be reassured that despite chaos on the ground, some deeper rhythm still held, and those who could read that rhythm could anticipate and align with it. Many societies believed that their highest gods dwelt among the stars and only descended to earth for crucial moments of teaching or judgment. It's easy to see this as fantasy, but it could also be a poetic memory of real teachers who came and went, sailors or navigators following star paths, or descendants of a coastal civilization traveling inland. Even more suggestive is the way myths preserve actual astronomical details. The Egyptians invested great significance in Sirius. Its heliacal rising correlated with the annual flood of the Nile. The Dogon of Mali revere the same star, and in their oral tradition, describe it as part of a binary system, mentioning a dense companion invisible to the unaided eye. The Maya tracked Venus with such precision that they recorded its cycles more accurately than many later European astronomers. Across cultures, detailed sky knowledge appears earlier than we'd expect if each civilization had to figure everything out from scratch. Some of this can be explained by long, disciplined observation. But such observation itself implies continuity lineages of watchers passing down records across generations. That is exactly the sort of continuity we might expect if there were older centers of learning behind them. Ancient maps add another layer. The famous Piri Reis map, compiled in the 16th century from older sources, seems to outline the coasts of South America and possibly Antarctica with surprising accuracy, including configurations that would have existed when those regions were more heavily glaciated. Various scholars argue over the details, but the broader point remains. Some early mapmakers had data that doesn't fit neatly into the known exploration timeline. The idea of deep time navigation may sound fantastical until we consider what we already know humans accomplished with far simpler tools. Polynesian sailors traversed the vast Pacific without compasses, finding tiny islands using nothing but star positions, wave patterns, bird behavior, and memory. Egyptians and Sumerians took to the sea thousands of years ago, trading along the coasts of the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf. Traces of ancient contact appear in genetics and artifacts in places where, according to conservative histories, there should have been no such exchange. If the first civilization had indeed been maritime or coastal, its people might have been the original great navigators. Their roots, recorded in oral tradition, could have trickled down into later cultures as myths of star paths, sea gods, and skyboats. Many flood legends, in fact, contain a motif of people being led by the heavens to new lands. The Sumerian hero Ziusudra, or Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh, often compared to Noah, survives a divine deluge and finds safety under guidance from the gods of heaven. In Polynesian lore, survivors of tremendous storms follow star lines to islands waiting just beyond reach. Even the rainbow that appears after Noah's flood can be read as a symbolic return of the sky's reliability, the reappearance of order after chaos. All of this points toward an unbroken thread of sky watching that predates writing by a vast margin. It also explains why ancient people invested so much effort into building structures that literally join earth and sky. Those monuments might have served as more than places of worship. They could have functioned as long-term observational instruments, pre-modern data centers built of stone. The same constellations, too, show up again and again with similar roles. Orion appears as a great hunter, warrior, or culture hero across Egyptian, Greek, Mesoamerican, and Aboriginal traditions. The Pleiades cluster recurs in myths from Japan to North America to Europe, often tied to beginnings, to seasonal change, or to journeys. These shared constellations are like fingerprints evidence that the first astronomers passed down their star lore widely, and that the stories attached to those stars carried across oceans with migrating peoples. If these myths are indeed partly memories, then they preserve not only plot and character, but coordinates. They remind us how our ancestors oriented themselves in time and space. The heavens were not merely decorative, they were a reference grid, a cosmic scaffolding. In a world recovering from catastrophe, gazing upward would have been more than curiosity. It would have been medicine, a way to remember that something enduring still existed. The land might flood, the climate might flip, but the stars wheeled on, calm and precise. Over time, however, our relationship to the sky changed. As civilizations stabilized and grew, some of them shifted from reverence to ambition. The sky became less a teacher and more a prize. Towers rose higher, not just to honor the heavens, but to command them symbolically. Observatories became displays of power as much as instruments of learning. Yet even then, the old habit persisted. Builders continued aligning their greatest works with solstices and star risings. They inscribed sacred numbers and cosmological ratios into their walls and courtyards, sometimes perhaps without fully remembering why. The original reasons faded, but the patterns remained. In this way, myth quietly continued its work in the background. It preserved not just the idea that gods had once descended from the sky, but the actual numerical and geometric knowledge associated with those gods. When modern researchers study ancient monuments, they often find consistent proportions, dimensions that reflect planetary cycles, the tilt of Earth's axis, or the slow drift of the equinoxes. It's as though the builders encoded cosmic rhythms into stone so that even if everything else was forgotten, the silent language of measure would remain. This persistent pattern across millennia suggests that knowledge rarely disappears cleanly. It tends to survive in disguise. Myths of sky gods may have kept the principles of astronomy alive long after the libraries that explained them had crumbled. The builders did more than remember that the heavens mattered. They remembered how to translate those heavens into earthly structures. We might ask what kind of civilization could have set all this in motion. Not necessarily one bristling with mechanical devices, but one that had time to watch, to calculate, to test, to teach. A culture in which careful attention to the sky and the earth was central, generation after generation. Perhaps that is why we find its traces not primarily in surviving cities, but in myths and alignments. Stories and star patterns are harder to erase than palaces. There is another recurring detail in myths of heavenly teachers. They often promise to return. Quetzalcoatl sails away, vowing to come back when the world is ready. The Egyptian Osiris is said to rule from the stars, watching until a later age. In Abrahamic traditions, a teacher ascends and is expected again. The pattern doesn't belong to any one culture. It's everywhere. These promises can be read as prophecy, but they can also be read as memory's way of refusing closure. Somewhere deep inside, humanity may still be waiting for the return of its first teachers, for the moment when long-buried knowledge fully resurfaces. Looking at where we stand now, it's tempting to believe we've surpassed anything the ancients could have imagined. Yet in another sense, we might simply be catching up, methodically rebuilding a picture of the universe that earlier minds glimpsed in different language. We have learned to chart the stars again, to measure the globe again, to send our own messengers into the sky. Perhaps progress is just memory, slowly clarifying. And so the sky gods remain with us, not as literal beings sitting on clouds, but as persistent impression shadows of those who first knit together earth and heaven in human thought. They taught us how to look up. In doing so, they taught us how to understand where we stand. The early mapmakers of the world left no universally readable manuals, only stories, angles, and alignments. But they left enough that when the time was right, we could start to reconstruct their intent. We're still following those star maps now, though we give them different names. Satellites trace orbits where earlier myths placed luminous chariots. Astronomers catalog the same constellations that ancient priests mythologized. The night sky that once inspired temples now feeds technology. But the underlying impulse is unchanged. To know where we come from. To know what came before. If a first civilization truly existed, its greatest accomplishment may not have been its architecture or its science, but its communication, its ability to send messages forward through 10 or 12,000 years, wrapped in legend and starlight. As we follow those messages, their outline sharpens. They seem to preserve a memory of balance between soil and sky, insight and humility, memory and meaning. Perhaps somewhere, scattered across deserts and jungles and continental shelves, more tangible fragments of that civilization wait to be found. But the grander map, the one inscribed in constellations and coded into shared myths, was never wholly lost. It has always been above us, patient. The same sky they watched, the same silent teacher. And as the old myths dim and glow again in our modern night, we begin to hear what they have been saying all along, that the gods of the sky were, at least in part, people of the earth, and that in remembering them, we are in some quiet way remembering ourselves. The stars might have drawn our ancestors' eyes upward, but the earth is where their hands told the rest of the story. Somewhere between heaven and stone, humanity began to build, not merely to shelter itself from the elements or mark off territory, but to remember. Across the globe, from the deserts of Egypt to the rainforests of Central America, from the high Andean plateaus to the valleys of Anatolia, we find structures that resist simple explanations of time and technique. They stand as if the planet itself had agreed to hold a particular shape. As if, long ago, someone learned how to persuade rock into order with a precision that still unsettles us. Study them closely, and a soft question arises again and again. Who built these, and how? The tightness of the joints, the mass of the stones, the uncanny alignments with the sky. Many of these works feel as if humanity woke one morning not learning how to build, but remembering that it knew. Consider the Great Pyramids of Giza. Each block weighs tons. They were quarried, shaped, transported, and set with such care that modern tools and cranes would struggle to reproduce the same combination of scale and accuracy. The Great Pyramid alone consists of more than 2 million stones. Its faces align with north, south, east, and west so closely that its margin of error is tiny. Its interior passages and dimensions embed mathematical ratios that echo the size and shape of the earth itself. We call this Egyptian brilliance, and it is. Yet even the Egyptians claim that their culture descended from an earlier golden age, an era overseen by gods who taught writing, architecture, and the laws of order. Those gods, they said, came from the stars, from a first time before the flood. Their names and stories shifted, but the memory of having inherited something older did not. If we travel to the Andes, we find the same enigma expressed in a different accent. The Inca left walls that look almost liquid in their precision. At Sacsayhuaman, enormous blocks weighing many tons fit together as though they were poured into place. No mortar binds them. Their edges are irregular yet interlock so securely that centuries of earthquakes have failed to bring them down. The engineering knowledge behind this, understanding the distribution of stress, the subtle tilting of stones, is sophisticated even by modern standards. Beneath some Inca constructions lie even older stone foundations, carved more finely and from larger pieces belonging to unnamed predecessors. The Inca themselves said they were not the first. Their legends speak of Viracocha Tall, pale teachers who arrived after a flood, spreading arts of building, agriculture, and order. Again, flood, mysterious instructors, sudden architecture. High on the Bolivian Altiplano sits Pumapunku, perhaps the strangest of all. There, blocks of hard andesite and diorite stone so tough that modern drills strain against them have been carved with crisp right angles, precise grooves, and interlocking shapes that look not chiseled, but machined. Some weigh more than 100 tons. The site sits over 3,000 meters above sea level, far from any plausible quarry big enough to match the stone. We don't know how those blocks were cut, moved, or assembled, or even if Pumapunku is finished or the ruin of something grander. Traditional explanations involving basic tools and sheer manpower struggle against the details. The same song plays across the world in different variations. On Easter Island, ranks of Moai statues, some still half buried, peer over the land as if waiting for something. In Lebanon, at Baalbek, 3 limestone blocks known as the Trilithon each weigh more than 800 tons, stacked with measured intention. No pulley or crane system we attribute to that era seems sufficient to explain their placement. These structures do not just speak of skill, they whisper of continuity, a shared architectural intelligence that appears in places supposedly cut off from one another. Cyclopean stones, celestial alignments, a fixation on durability. If each culture had invented these on its own, the coincidences would be extraordinary. If they are descendants of a common heritage, then perhaps the language of that first civilization was not primarily spoken or written, but carved. Stone does what parchment cannot. It endures flood and fire. If you wanted to send knowledge beyond the life expectancy of your own culture, there would be few better choices than the hardest rocks you could find. Perhaps that is what these builders were doing, preserving more than memory of their own existence. Maybe they were encoding proportions, directions, and relationships, a language of mathematics meant to speak even when no one remembers how to read. In many ancient sites, the very stones seem to carry intent, not in any mystical sense, but in the stubborn way they hold specific angles, ratios, and orientations long after the societies that placed them have vanished. Later peoples built on top of these foundations worshipped among them and told tales about the giants or gods who had raised them. Memory became masonry. Myth became architecture. In Mesopotamia, tiered temples called ziggurats were literally bridges between heaven and earth. The biblical story of the Tower of Babel recalls a great structure meant to reach the heavens, built by humans who once spoke one language. The gods, displeased, fracture that language and scatter the builders. Beneath the moral frame, there is a curious idea that there was once a unified way of speaking, a shared understanding, broken apart after an ambitious construction. Perhaps this is not just a caution about pride, but a distant recollection of a time when humans shared a more coherent system of knowledge, one that splintered when its physical center collapsed. The same motif appears elsewhere. The Greeks told of Titans, an older race of immense beings who built vast works before being cast down. The Maya remembered earlier worlds obliterated by flood and upheaval, their mountains overturned. In Near Eastern lore, the Nephilim are ancient giants associated with great constructions before a flood wipes their traces away. Again, master builders erased, only their stones remaining to puzzle later people who no longer remembered how it was done. To modern readers, these stories sound like allegories of power, but they might also be the way distant descendants remembered a long-gone culture of builders, no larger than us, but greater in their continuity of knowledge. The scale of their works may not have been about pride, but about certainty. If you had seen your cities drowned or burned once before, would you not try to build the next ones to last, to withstand earthquakes, storms, the grinding of time itself? If your memory of the last fall still haunted you, you might decide that this time you would carve your understanding so deeply into the planet that it could not easily be erased. It's no accident that so many of these ancient stoneworks also align with the sky. The builders were not only masons, they were astronomers. The Great Pyramid's orientation echoes Orion and the motion of certain stars. The temples of Angkor Wat in Cambodia mirror constellations and track solstices. Machu Picchu stones frame the rising sun at equinox with surgical accuracy. Each one functions as a kind of instrument, linking human space to celestial time. It's as if all these monuments, from Peru to Turkey to Cambodia, were pieces of a single scattered observatory network, a global architecture keyed to the same cosmic rhythms. The expertise needed to accomplish this across distant lands suggests more than isolated genius. It suggests a shared foundation, a blueprint old enough and robust enough that people could still partially reconstruct it even after great forgetting. If that's so, then the makers of impossible stone were not just brilliant engineers in their own right. They were also inheritors last bearers of an unnamed lineage, translating fragments of inherited geometry and cosmology into massive, enduring forms. When our modern instruments analyze these structures, we keep finding the same numbers. Ratios like the golden mean, relationships tied to planetary cycles, constants that reappear in Greece, in Egypt, in Mesoamerica, in India. The philosopher Pythagoras credited Egypt as his source. An Egyptian priest pointed further back to a still earlier wisdom. The Vedic texts of India speak of sacred geometry as the underlying template of reality. Everywhere the same whisper. Buildings should reflect the harmony of the cosmos. Perhaps that belief was not only spiritual, perhaps it was also empirical. They had watched the heavens long enough to know that certain patterns produced stability. When they built, they were not merely copying the sky for beauty's sake. They were embedding the same mathematics that governed celestial motion into their cities, aligning human life with the wider order. When we visit these places now, we often see only ruins. We forget that, for thousands of years, they functioned as living instruments. Temples were not just for worship. At dawn on specific days, beams of light would enter through carefully positioned openings, illuminating carvings that marked equinox or solstice. Courtyards cast shadows that told time. Inner chambers resonated with sound in specific frequencies. The builders weren't only honoring the sun, they were synchronizing with it. Each structure was a kind of calibrated device, a clock, a compass, a calendar, and sometimes, perhaps, something more. This synchronization may have been the primary achievement of that deep past, the ability to align human society with the larger cycles of nature. Their buildings were not random or merely ornamental. They were attempts to live in tune. If that is the case, then the most crucial thing those builders left us was not their stone, but their method. Observe, measure, remember. Build in harmony with what you learn. That method has never entirely vanished. It lives on in cathedrals oriented to catch the solstice sun, in mandalas divided into precise ratios, in modern architecture that tries again to echo natural forms. The memory continues to express itself, even when we no longer recognize its origin. The builders of impossible stone might have been the last generation to fully remember the source. Their works are not only testimonials of skill, but fragments of continuity. The last visible links to the world that stood before the flood. If we could fully read the language they carved, if we understood each alignment and proportion the way they once did, we might recover not just how they built, but why. And that why might be disarmingly simple. They built because they knew how easily the world forgets. They had seen knowledge drowned and burned once already. They resolved to leave behind things that could not so easily be washed away. So they turned their understanding into stone. They aimed it at the stars. They trusted that someday, someone would notice. Every block is a sentence. Every angle a word. Together they form a story so large we are only beginning to parse it. A story about how memory became architecture, and how architecture became a bridge between past and future. Follow that bridge far enough and it leads into even more elusive territory. The knowledge those builders said they inherited from beings before them. The God-given arts that united heaven, earth, and human understanding. The lost science that appears only in shards, in legends of sound that move stone, of energies drawn from the earth, of vibrations that shape reality. That is where the journey turns next. Into the scattered traces of a forgotten science. One that may have been less about machines and more about knowing how to tune memory itself. Knowledge, unlike stone or fire, is invisible, until someone calls it back. You can hold a chisel in your hand or feel the warmth of a flame, but the understanding that shaped those things is weightless. It vanishes the instant a culture stops remembering it. What endures is the result, the tool, the monument, not the process that birthed it. Somewhere deep in our past, humanity crossed a threshold between remembering and rediscovering. We still live with the echo of that crossing, a faint sense that there are things we once knew but can no longer quite explain. It's an odd thought that civilization might not have been a single invention, but a reawakening. If the architects of impossible stone were inheriting a memory rather than improvising from nothing, then we must ask, what exactly were they trying so hard to preserve? What was precious enough, fragile enough that they shaped entire mountains of rock to encode it? Ancient myths offer scattered hints. They speak of gifts from the gods, the invention of writing, the secrets of smelting and alloy, the art of healing the body, the ability to lift great weights, to read the sky, to draw unseen forces from the earth. To the people recording these stories, often thousands of years after the fact, such abilities seemed magical. They belonged to beings beyond ordinary human reach. But what if they weren't magic at all? What if they were just the last surviving skills of a civilization that had, in its own way, mastered the natural world more deeply than we yet understand? Traces of that forgotten science lie all around us, half hidden. Temples and pyramids aligned not only with the stars, but with magnetic north. Ancient theaters and chambers tuned so precisely that a whisper can be heard clearly across a crowd. Pigments on old walls that remain bright after millennia, produced through chemical processes we still study. Bas-reliefs and statues carved into granite and basalt without obvious tool marks, as though the stone itself had been softened. These are not miracles. They are technologies of understanding. The trouble is that many of the people who inherited them no longer knew how they worked. They could imitate the outward forms, repeat the rituals, rebuild shrines in the same shapes, but the underlying principles had begun to slip away. In that sense, much of what we call early civilization may have stood on the ghost of older knowledge. Structures built according to patterns remembered, but not fully comprehended. A kind of cultural muscle memory. Take the problem of moving massive stones. How did people without steel cranes or wheeled vehicles lift and transport blocks weighing hundreds of tons? Official explanations often rely on combinations of ropes, sledges, rollers, and human labor. In some cases, those answers may be correct. But when we confront the largest stones, the trilithon at Baalbek, the monoliths at Pumapunku, the foundation blocks at Cusco, the scale and precision push those explanations to their limit. It's not just about force, it's about control. Across different cultures, myths quietly point to unusual methods. Stories of stones that float when certain chants are sung, tales of priests using trumpets and drums to lighten rock, legends of builders who whistle slabs into place. We usually file these under fantasy. Yet a number of researchers have wondered whether there might once have been real techniques involving sound, vibration, or magnetism methods lost with time. Others have suggested chemical processes, pastes made from certain plants or minerals, able to soften stone surfaces just enough to shape them like clay before they rehardened. Some obscure texts hint at such knowledge. We cannot be certain. But we do know that many ancient works demonstrate a level of control over hard stone that is, at the very least, difficult to explain. Across cultures, myths of creation often begin not with light, but with sound. In Egypt, Thoth brings the world into order through speech. In India, a primal vibration, Aum, resonates everything into being. In the Hebrew tradition, creation starts with a spoken word, "Let there be." In Central Asian stories, a divine musician sings the world into form. In Tibet, monks have long used sound to shape sand, soft materials, and even mood in ways that seem purely spiritual to us, but may recall a time when vibration was seen as both sacred and practical. Perhaps these tales are not only metaphors for communication or authority. Perhaps they dimly remember a physical truth, that sound and vibration can move, align, and even alter matter. We now know that resonance can shatter glass, bend metal, or affect living tissue. We use ultrasound to see inside bodies and to break apart kidney stones. Cymatics reveals how sound creates patterns in sand and water. It is not outrageous to imagine that a civilization deeply attuned to such phenomena might have developed ways to apply them to building and shaping stone. What we label science today, observation, testing, measurement, may once have been woven tightly into ritual, art, and ceremony. The ancients may not have spoken of physics and biology, but they observed the same world and its laws. Their experiments might have been conducted through chance, through the careful placement of stones, through attendant offerings, yet still rooted in real cause and effect. They might not have seen a divide between religion, art, and technology at all. To them, these would have been different faces of the same pursuit, aligning with the patterns of the world. In that light, the lost knowledge of the deep past may not have revolved around machines and engines, but around resonance, understanding how natural forces interact and how to work with them instead of against them, how energy travels through rock and water, how vibration affects the body, how invisible currents flow through the planet itself. It's worth noting that many megalithic sites sit along what geologists now recognize as zones of unusual magnetism or conductivity, places where telluric currents, the faint electric flows in Earth's crust, are stronger or cross. These places often amplify sound in strange ways or have subtle effects on human perception. Their placement may not be random. At Stonehenge, the configuration of stones carries a voice around the circle. In the hypogeum of Hal Saflieni in Malta, certain low tones resonate through the chambers, affecting brainwave patterns. Inside the Great Pyramid, specific frequencies echo and swell, as though the chambers are tuned to particular notes. The effect may be incidental, but it might also be a relic of deliberate acoustic design. These phenomena could all be coincidences, or they could be flickers of an old, largely forgotten science of energy. Not energy in the modern sense of electricity and petroleum, but in the sense of alignment, the ways that sound, light, magnetism, and geometry interact with human consciousness and health. To our ears, this might sound mystical. Yet modern research is slowly circling back to similar questions. We study how certain frequencies can ease pain or anxiety. We explore how electromagnetic fields affect sleep and mood. We discover that the structure of our cells responds to mechanical vibration. Science, after a long focus on the visible and tangible, is beginning to re-examine subtler forces. The ancients may have approached those same forces intuitively, encoding their findings in myth and monumental design. Their stories of gods singing worlds into order, or of sacred tones shaping reality, might be poetic descriptions of very practical experiments. In many traditions, creation is less an act of building and more an act of tuning. The universe is set in order, not assembled from parts. This idea resonates with modern physics, which describes reality as a symphony of vibrations, fields, and waves rather than solid blocks. If the first civilization grasped this, even partially, their temples might have been more than places of worship. They may have been instruments harmonizing people, land, and sky. Their knowledge might have also extended to the grand cycles of the cosmos. Many ancient calendars were astonishingly sophisticated, tracking the movements of planets, eclipses, and long-term changes in the sky. The ability to predict these things requires centuries of consistent observation and a robust mathematical framework. In Sumer, we find a sexagesimal base 60 number system and evidence of advanced geometry. In Egypt, the proportions of pyramid and temple often reflect the length of the year, the curvature of the earth, and other constants. In Mesoamerica, the Maya developed interlocking calendars capable of predicting planetary cycles far into the future. These are not the labors of people barely emerging from ignorance. They are the marks of a tradition that had time to mature and may be the last flowering of something older. When we step back, a pattern sharpens. Myths of gods descending from the sky, and teaching humanity could be memories of the transmission of this complex worldview. The impossible stoneworks might be the physical preservation of its techniques and insights. The monuments, with their precise alignments, may be textbooks etched into bedrock, legible only to those who understand their language of angles and ratios. Myth, in this context, becomes a protective casing around knowledge. It stores information in a resilient form, encoded in archetype and emotion, so that it can survive the destruction of libraries and the collapse of institutions. Even when people forget what the rituals mean, they continue to perform them, and some fragment of the original code persists. You can see this in the way mathematical constants recur. Pi, the golden ratio, square roots embedded in temple ground plans and statue proportions. These numbers are not printed anywhere on the stones. They are expressed through shape. The builders might not have spoken of them as constants, but they understood the relationships they describe. Symbols, too, carry double lives. The serpent, for example, appears across cultures as a villain, a healer, a bringer of knowledge, a guardian of thresholds. In India, Kundalini is pictured as a coiled serpent rising through the spine-latent energy awakening. In Greece, the Ouroboros, a snake eating its own tail, symbolizes cycles and continuity. In Mesoamerica, the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl embodies both earth and sky, matter and spirit. Seen one way, these are just colorful images. Seen another, they are abstract models, depictions of energy, circulation, and transformation. In modern diagrams, waves and fields sometimes take on similar forms. The spiral, another global symbol, mirrors the structures of galaxies, storms, shells, and even the double helix of DNA. The earliest thinkers may not have known those specific facts, but they recognized the forms. They saw that certain shapes repeated in nature and assigned them meaning accordingly. Over time, those meanings deepened. The symbols became a portable language, the world's first visual shorthand. It's possible that the first civilization built an entire system of knowledge on such symbols, a kind of proto-science expressed through geometry, myth, and art, rather than through equations and textbooks. When that civilization fell, the system shattered. Its fragments lived on as sacred images, as patterns in shrines and stories, long after their original definitions were forgotten. Why would such knowledge disappear? Catastrophe can erase a lot, but not so cleanly. For techniques and principles to be lost on this scale, something else must have been at work. Sometimes, forgetting is intentional. Societies under deep stress may decide that certain knowledge is dangerous. In the aftermath of a devastating event, an uncontrolled experiment, a weapon misused, or simply a hubris that led to collapse, the survivors might choose to conceal what they know, or encode it so thoroughly in myth that only the most dedicated seekers can reconstruct it. Instead of leaving plain manuals that anyone could misuse, they leave puzzles, stories, symbols, alignments. Only those who combine curiosity with humility and patience can rediscover the principles. In that way, knowledge is safeguarded. It is not destroyed, but hidden behind the veil of metaphor. We see smaller versions of this pattern in many oral cultures. Sacred teachings are often embedded in songs, dances, or stories, only fully explained to initiates after long preparation. The knowledge is not secret out of arrogance. It is secret because it demands a certain capacity to handle. If a great civilization had once wielded powerful techniques, whether of energy, psychology, or ecology, it might have feared a repeat of its own downfall. The guardians of that knowledge might have chosen to let the explicit formulas die while preserving their essence in myth, trusting that future ages would be wise enough to rediscover them in gentler form. From this angle, myth is both archive and filter. It allows truth to survive, but slows access to it. Looking at the arc of human learning, we see something that fits this model. Every few centuries, we discover ideas that older cultures seem to have already intuited. The atom, the wave nature of reality, the interconnectedness of life. Each time, we present these as bold, new insights, yet echoes of them live in very old stories. Modern physics describes a universe of interacting fields where particles are localized expressions of deeper underlying realities. Ancient traditions speak of a world woven from a single subtle substance, given many names: prana, chi, spirit, ether. These are not scientific terms, but they point toward a sense that everything is connected by something unseen. The gap between those descriptions is not as vast as we once assumed. The first civilization, if it existed, might have stood in that gap, seeing no contradiction between the measured and the sacred, between numbers and stories. Their science would have been holistic, their spirituality empirical in its own way. To them, to understand a phenomenon and to revere it might have been the same gesture. If that was their legacy, it is easy to see why later generations with narrower tools would remember them as gods. They would have seemed to hold the keys to both inner and outer worlds, to health, to agriculture, to weather, to architecture, to the movements of the sky, and perhaps even to the subtleties of consciousness itself. As time wore on, the libraries burned, the cities fell, and their direct teachings faded. But the echo of their worldview persisted in geometry, in sacred ratios, in lingering symbols. That echo resurfaces whenever we discover, with great excitement, that the universe is more unified and more alive than we previously thought. We call this progress. They might have called it remembering. The lost knowledge of the deep past may never be restored in its original complete form. Too many details have dissolved. But perhaps that's not the point. The point might be the direction back toward integration, toward a way of knowing that does not split reality into hostile categories, but recognizes that story and measurement, myth and mathematics, are simply two different lenses on the same truth. The ancients may have seen that matter and mind, energy, and awareness are not separate. Modern physics, neuroscience, and philosophy edge towards similar conclusions, each in their own vocabulary. If the first civilization had already glimpsed that unity, their greatest message to us might not be a specific technology or formula. It might be a reminder not to treat any single way of knowing as complete. Their temples would then stand not as museums of an obsolete science, but as beacons, calling us back toward wholeness. We're relearning what they may already have understood, that the universe is not a pile of inert objects, but a dynamic, relational field. That our attempts to understand it are themselves part of that field. That our stories, equations, rituals, and art are all expressions of one long continuous act of remembering. The lost knowledge, then, is not so much a set of missing facts as a missing relationship, a broken continuity between observation and meaning. The ancients did not study the world in order to dominate it. They studied it to belong to it more deeply. Somewhere along the line, we forgot that second part. And so the real question is not whether we can recover every technique or secret. It's whether we can listen closely enough to the fragments we still have. The stones, the stories, the symbols are all still here, humming quietly with echoes of intent. To hear them, we have to do something very old and very simple. Allow curiosity to soften certainty, to treat myth not as childish error, but as another form of data. To let wonder and analysis sit side by side. In the ruins of old shrines and the lines of forgotten epics, something still vibrates. Not just the memory of hands lifting stone, but the memory of minds in conversation with the world. That vibration is waiting, as it always has, for someone to notice. If we keep following that subtle hum, it leads us deeper into the point where history doesn't simply fade, but breaks. The great forgetting. The moment when the last clear lines of that earlier world sank beneath the tide, and what had been solid memory slipped into the softer language of myth. Forgetting doesn't happen in a single stroke. It drifts in slowly, like fog rolling over a familiar landscape, softening its edges until even what we thought we knew begins to blur. One generation loses a word. The next loses what that word was tied to. A few more, and an entire story evaporates. Somewhere in the long memory of our species, there was a time when remembering became too heavy. The world had changed. The old structures no longer fit the new terrain. Knowledge that had once been the backbone of life became, little by little, irrelevant, uncomfortable, or painful, and so it began to slip. What we now call the dawn of history, those first neat lines scratched into clay, those early chronicles of kings and wars, may just as easily be the dusk of something older. If a first civilization truly existed, its end was almost certainly not a single dramatic explosion, not one day of fire or one night of water, but a prolonged unraveling, a cascade of partial losses strung out over generations, until at last, the thread connecting meaning to memory snapped. When we look at scattered ruins on every continent, we're seeing what remains after a long, slow forgetting. Temples worn down to foundations, names reduced to hollow syllables, lost scripts that no one alive can read. Harder to see are the absences, the missing bridges, the vanished lineages of thought, the gaps between inventions that sit like blank pages in an otherwise continuous book. Around 12,000 years ago, the climate finally calmed after a period of wild instability. Sea levels leveled off, forests took hold, animal populations adjusted to the new world. Human communities regained numbers and confidence. You might expect, then, to see a straight line of development. But instead, what appears is fragmentation. Technologies pop into existence with no clear ancestors. Knowledge surfaces fully formed, as if remembered rather than gradually refined. It's as though people woke up with pieces of a puzzle in their hands but could not recall where the puzzle came from. Archaeology bears this out in subtle ways. The builders of Gobekli Tepe orchestrated enormous megalithic circles, then, for reasons still debated, intentionally buried them under tons of earth, sealing their own achievement. In Sumer, as soon as we see writing appear, it is already sophisticated use to track trade, law, geometry, and myth. In Egypt, hieroglyphs, a 365-day calendar, and complex astronomy appear together, with no obvious period of childish experimentation scribbled behind them. In the Indus Valley, cities rise with gridded streets, drainage systems, and standardized weights, yet leave behind no deciphered texts to explain how they came to be. These cultures do not look like beginners. They look like people picking up an interrupted thread. The great forgetting may have been, in part, the price of survival. After catastrophe, priorities narrow. Staying alive today becomes more urgent than keeping track of what happened a century ago. Knowledge turns local again, it becomes specialized, immediate, practical. Stories that once encoded scientific or cosmological understanding are told more for their moral comfort than their data. The why quietly erodes. The what remains as ritual. A midwinter ceremony that once marked a precise astronomical event becomes, over time, something we do because our ancestors did. A symbol that once conveyed a mathematical ratio becomes a divine emblem whose geometry no one is meant to question. The structure is preserved. The original function is obscured. That is how memory turns into superstition. An action that once had a clear purpose persists long after the reasons are forgotten. To outsiders, it may look irrational. To insiders, it is sacred. Somewhere behind both views, a fragment of a much older logic still lingers. Over generations, those fragments harden into religion, art, and folklore. What was once instruction becomes inspiration. A lost science becomes a mythic age of miracles. The literal details recede, but the emotional pattern endures. Strangely, that transformation is not a failure. It is the very mechanism that lets some knowledge survive at all. A formula written on fragile bark or papyrus can disappear in a single fire. A story woven into the identity of a people can survive invasions, disasters, and centuries of neglect. The ancients may have understood this intuitively. which is why they invested so much meaning in narrative. Myth was not ignorance, it was strategy. Forgetting, then, was not total destruction, it was adaptation. Knowledge ducked beneath the surface to ride out the storm. Yet a haunting question still hovers. What could have been so overwhelming that it drove humanity into that much amnesia? Nature offers some answers. The end of the Ice Age was violent. The Younger Dryas period brought sudden cooling, wildfires, and dramatic shifts in climate. One controversial hypothesis suggests that fragments of a comet struck or exploded over the Earth around 12,800 years ago, igniting vast fires and plunging the planet back into cold. Sediment layers rich in soot, microscopic spherules, and unusual chemical signatures seem, to some, to support this. If anything like that happened, it would have meant years of darkened skies, disrupted seasons, and mass die-offs. Coastal settlements would have been pounded by floods. Inland communities would have found crops failing, game patterns shifting wildly. Even if a few centers of learning survived physically, their world would have been unrecognizable. To those who lived through it, the event would not have felt natural in the calm scientific sense. It would have felt like divine anger, like the overturning of the rules of existence. A shattering on that scale can warp collective memory. It can make people recoil not just from the disaster itself, but from whatever knowledge they believe led to it. Yet forgetting can also be cultural, even without cosmic impacts. We see this vividly in more recent history. After the fall of Rome, much of Western Europe lost the techniques of concrete, large-scale road building, and efficient plumbing. Libraries were sacked or simply left to decay. Monks copied what texts they could, often prioritizing religious or philosophical works over technical manuals. No one burned those formulas deliberately in a single grand act of rejection. They simply became irrelevant for a while. The social context that had made them necessary disappeared. As a result, skills that had seemed permanent within the empire became, within a few generations, mysterious. If that kind of regression can happen in centuries, imagine what can happen in millennia. The pattern repeats. The Maya built stunning cities tied closely to celestial cycles, then left them. The reasons drought, war, overuse of land are still debated. But what's clear is that their writing and astronomical systems nearly vanished with the decline of their urban centers. Later descendants preserved parts of the tradition, but much was lost. In the Andes, techniques for working stone at the scale of earlier builders seem to have faded long before Europeans arrived. Even the people living among the Cyclopean walls regarded them as relics from an older age. The same happens in Mesopotamia. Later peoples inhabited mounds and ruins, sometimes without knowing who had built the oldest layers. It's not that intelligence disappeared, it's that the chain of transmission snapped. Sometimes the forgetting is psychological. Trauma can bury memory on an individual level. It can do something similar collectively. If an entire society witnesses the destruction of its world, the survivors may not wish to dwell on the details. They might encode the event in story, framed as divine judgment or cosmic reset, and leave it at that. Digging too deeply into what led to the catastrophe could feel like tempting fate. We can see traces of this caution in later myths. Prometheus, who brings fire symbol of knowledge and technology to humanity, is punished. The biblical tree of knowledge brings exile. In Sumerian stories, certain divine secrets are not to be given freely to mortals. Knowledge is both gift and danger. These patterns could simply be moral commentary. Don't overreach. But they might also carry historical memory, vague recollection of a time when knowing too much or wielding knowledge without restraint contributed to real disaster. In such a climate, forgetting could become a form of protection, a self-imposed limit. We will not go there again, not for a long time. Yet even with all this, memory never vanishes entirely. It hides in the cracks. People continue to build with familiar shapes. They align doorways to sunrise and sunset. They paint spirals and serpents. They pass on stories of a time before the flood without fully understanding them. We can think of the great forgetting not as a clean erasure, but as a kind of dormancy. Knowledge sinks into mythic soil, lying dormant like a seed. When conditions are right, when curiosity and capacity return, it sprouts again. History then looks less like progress from ignorance to enlightenment and more like a spiral. We circle around the same truths again and again, each time seeing them from a slightly higher vantage. The ancients recognized this cyclical nature. Many of their symbols, the serpent biting its tail, the spinning wheel, the endless not speak of time not as a line, but as a turning. Forgetfulness becomes part of the cycle, not the end, but one phase. What does this mean for us now? We live in an age that treats information as synonymous with memory. We store data by the petabyte. We assume that if it's backed up to enough servers, it's safe. But data is not understanding. A civilization can preserve every fact and still forget what those facts are for. The ancients, who had no hard drives, may have understood something we are only relearning. Memory is not just about accumulation. It is about connection. Without a living context, knowledge is just noise. The real heart of the great forgetting, then, might not have been the loss of specific techniques. It might have been the loss of coherence, the sense that everything fit together. When that fabric tore, people were left with scattered patches useful in themselves, but no longer perceived as parts of a single design. Every so often, we catch glimpses of what that older coherence might have looked like. During the European Renaissance, scholars discovered Greek and Roman texts that revealed a level of thought and skill much of medieval Europe had not imagined. They weren't inventing geometry or philosophy from nothing. They were reconnecting with a conversation that had been interrupted. On a longer timescale, the same thing happens each time an ancient site or artifact forces us to revise our timeline. Gobekli Tepe, submerged cities, anomalous maps. They are all instances of the past tapping us on the shoulder and saying, "You have forgotten more than you realize." Sometimes, memory returns in ways that feel almost dreamlike. Inventors and scientists occasionally describe ideas that arrive whole, as if dropped fully formed into their minds. Nikola Tesla spoke of seeing complete devices in his imagination, with a clarity that allowed him to build them directly. Artists, writers, and mystics across history have described similar experiences. We usually call this inspiration, but the word shares a root with in spirit, something breathed in. Carl Jung spoke of a collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of symbols and patterns that individuals can tap into. Whether we take that literally or metaphorically, it speaks to a sense that not all knowledge originates in the individual. Some of it feels remembered. That feeling may be accurate on a deeper level. Human consciousness, shaped by millions of years of evolution and thousands of years of culture, carries within it the residues of countless experiences it never personally lived. Myths, rituals, inherited fears and longings. These are all forms of memory written into our nervous systems and languages. The great forgetting might have scattered the explicit story of the first civilization, but its imprint could still live in us, in what we find beautiful, in what we fear, in the questions we can't stop asking. We see towers and wonder what it would be like to climb higher. We see the sea and both long for and fear it. We look at stars and feel something between homesickness and awe. These responses feel personal, but they may also be ancestral. Perhaps the fall of that early world was necessary in some way we can't yet grasp. Perhaps knowledge had grown faster than wisdom. Perhaps they played with forces they did not fully master. Perhaps the reset, painful as it was, created space for a different kind of growth. In this view, forgetting is not only loss, but mercy. A chance to start again without the full weight of old mistakes. The cycle of remembering and forgetting becomes a kind of cosmic safeguard, yet the old pull remains. We are drawn back again and again to the edge of the unknown. We keep rebuilding towers, both literal and metaphorical. We push the boundaries of technology, power, and perception. The story repeats itself, not in exact detail, but in pattern. In our current age, the traces of the great forgetting are visible in the way we tell history. We like clean narratives, before and after, primitive and advanced, dark age and enlightenment. But the evidence tells a different story, one of overlapping rises and falls, of blended inheritances and lost lineages. Every stone circle, every mysterious ruin, every stubborn myth is a reminder that what we call the beginning depends on where we start counting. We may not be the first civilization to stand at a crossroads between knowledge and humility. That realization does not need to paralyze us. It can ground us. It can remind us that forgetting is never final, that whatever has been truly understood once can, in some form, be understood again. Knowledge, when lost, leaves impressions. In legend, in symbol, in architecture, in the unshakable feeling that the world has depths we have not yet plumbed. Those impressions are what guide rediscovery. A misplaced tool can be found if you remember roughly where you left it. Humanity's half-remembered stories of floods, of sky beings, of golden ages and falls may be doing that for us, pointing vaguely toward the corners of history where something important slipped away. Somewhere beneath layers of earth and layers of story, the memory of that first world still trembles. We sense it in myths that refuse to fade, in alignments that don't seem accidental, in the haunting feeling that our ancestors knew something essential we've badly blurred. The great forgetting scattered that knowledge like ash in the wind, but it did not extinguish it. It only invited us much later to seek it afresh in our own language, as we listen more closely to the soil, to the stars, to the stories. We begin to hear old voices coming through, the storytellers, the builders, the watchers of the sky, each one carrying a shard of a broken mirror. Those shards still shape us in how we dream of the future, in how we grieve what we destroy, in how we keep circling back to the same vast questions. And it is through those questions that the next part of this journey begins, following the echoes of the old world as they pass from memory to myth, from fact to fable, and then, much later, back into curiosity. Because even when a civilization forgets, it never abandons its story entirely. It simply waits for someone, somewhere, to remember how the melody goes. Between silence and speech, there's a narrow place where memory waits. It doesn't live in stone shelves or digital files. It lives in rhythm, in the rise and fall of a voice, in the steady beat of repeated words. When written history fails or falls away, spoken story becomes the bridge. That is how memory crossed the dark ages of our species, carried in breath, from mouth to ear, from one night's fire to the next. Somewhere between silence and language, there's a narrow space where memory lingers. It doesn't reside in shelves or stones, but in rhythm, in the pattern of syllables, in the cadence of a human voice that knows how to keep something alive simply by saying it out loud. When writing is absent or broken, spoken words become the bridge across time. For tens of thousands of years, that is how knowledge traveled, not as ink on pages, but as sound in the air, from breath to ear, from elder to child, from one small circle of light to another in a dark and enormous world. If the great forgetting scattered the pieces of the first civilization, the storytellers were the ones who began to gather them again. Every culture has its custodians of memory, griots and bards, shamans and priests, poets and elders. Their role has never been merely to entertain. They were archives in motion, living vessels of continuity. They remembered genealogies, migrations, old battles, laws, agreements, and also mysteries. The myths of creation, the tales of floods, the hints of a time before. Picture a night 10,000 years ago. A group sits around a fire at the edge of a forest or plain. Beyond the glow, the world is pure darkness alive, but unseen. Sparks drift upward like tiny temporary stars. A storyteller clears their throat. The group quiets, The voice that follows is slow, deliberate, shaped by countless repetitions. It does not feel like improvisation. It feels like invocation. Every pause is measured. Every phrase has weight. The children lean closer. The adults close their eyes and listen. When the storyteller speaks of gods descending from the heavens or of cities swallowed by water, heads nod not in skepticism, but in recognition. The listeners have heard this before. They could almost speak along with it. And someday, some of them will. This is how knowledge survived when nothing was written. It was not stored, it was reenacted. Each telling was an act of renewal. Each listener became, in time, a potential new teller. Because of that, stories had to be crafted in a way that brains could hold. Repetition, rhythm, and pattern weren't just aesthetic choices. They were tools. Over generations, oral tradition became a kind of neural web that spanned continents and centuries. It linked people who would never meet in person. It allowed a memory born in one era to remain vivid in another. You can still hear its echoes today in chants, prayers, and songs that have lasted for hundreds or even thousands of years with minimal change. Rhyme and meter are not trivial ornaments. They are mnemonic technology. A story set to a pulse is far harder to lose. Across the world, early peoples used this oral technology to store the information they considered indispensable. In Polynesia, navigators memorized the night sky as if it were a song, each verse tied to a star path, a swell pattern, a sequence of islands. In West Africa, griots held entire dynastic chronicles in memory, endless chains of names and events linked in rhythm. In the Vedic tradition of India, priests memorized texts so long and intricate that committing them to writing would have felt less secure than holding them in a flawlessly trained mind. These weren't party tricks. They were acts of devotion. To remember was sacred work. The storytellers understood that if they failed, whole worlds could vanish. When we look at the oldest myths through this lens, we begin to see how deliberate they are. They were not casual tales thrown together for amusement. They were compression complex experiences and observations squeezed into symbolic scenes that memory could protect. The flood, the sky beings, the builders, the golden age. These are like zip files for entire centuries of human experience, and like any compressed file, they change form to survive. The surface story evolves as it moves from land to land, but the internal structure, the bones of the narrative, remain surprisingly constant. That's why the same mythic themes show up in cultures that never exchanged letters or ships. Floods after hubris, gods arriving from the sky, a lost world of harmony ruined and gone. These repeating structures are like fingerprints left by memory itself. When writing appeared, it froze some of these living stories. What had once been fluid and adaptable became fixed in ink and stone. The Epic of Gilgamesh is one of our earliest written works, but even it is a capture of something older, a fluid oral epic pinned down in a particular form at a particular time. Writing granted humans a new kind of endurance. Words could now outlive not only the speaker, but the spoken tradition itself. Yet it also changed our relationship to story. The scribe does not embody the tale the way the oral storyteller does. They observe and record. Something in the intimacy of transmission becomes less direct. Still, even after writing spreads, certain stories remain too important or too alive to be trusted to fragile materials. In many indigenous traditions, some narratives are never written. They are spoken only in specific seasons, by chosen voices, to attentive ears. To write them would be to reduce them. That is a faint echo of a much older understanding, that memory is, first and foremost, an embodied act. If a first civilization did exist, and if its cities and books were largely erased, its memory might have survived primarily in this embodied way. Not as intact histories, but as fragments folded into song and ritual. Those fragments would scatter as people migrated and new languages emerged. A myth of a shining island might morph into a tale of a mountain homeland. A memory of a teacher from the sea might become a god of the storm. But deep inside, certain shapes would persist. Anthropologists and linguists today are beginning to recognize that some oral traditions are far older than we once believed possible. Aboriginal groups in Australia, for instance, have stories that describe coastlines and river mouths as they were before sea levels rose at the end of the Ice Age. These tales, passed down verbally, match geological reconstructions of landscapes submerged more than 7,000 years ago. In the Pacific Northwest of North America, indigenous stories speak of fire from the sky, lands shaking, and waters rising, images that align remarkably well with evidence of ancient meteor impacts and megathrust quakes. Again, these tales aren't just vague metaphors. They correspond to specific geological events. If long-term memory of this kind is possible, and the evidence suggests it is, then the idea that myths could preserve elements of a very old civilization is not outlandish. The details might have shifted, but the underlying experiences could linger for millennia. In many ancient languages, the words for story and truth overlap. In Sumerian, a word like mi or nam can carry meanings of law, essence, and decree all at once. In Sanskrit, RTA refers to cosmic order and rightness, but also to the way that order is expressed and maintained. Story and reality are not easily separated. For those cultures, to forget a foundational myth was not simply to lose entertainment. It was to fall out of alignment with the world. Remembering the stories was an act of participating in reality itself. That is why storytellers were revered. They were not mere creators, but guardians, ensuring that the past remained present enough to guide the future. When they spoke, they did so on behalf of generations. In some societies, this responsibility was literal. Among the Maori of New Zealand, oral genealogies trace descent back through 40 or more generations, linking living people to ancestors in careful, spoken chains. Among the Dogon of Mali, priests carry intricate astronomical lore wrapped in mythic form, reciting knowledge of star systems long before telescopes. In Navajo ceremonies, chants describing the landscape, seasons, and balance of elements are used for healing, carrying both cosmology and practical wisdom. These traditions did not arise from arbitrary imagination. They came from disciplined remembrance. It is humbling to realize that the oldest preservation technology is not stone or ink, but trained human attention. A mind tuned by rhythm and repetition can hold entire libraries without paper. Even in our wired age, this ancient method hasn't vanished. Podcasts, spoken word performances, long-form audio stories, they all resurrect the primacy of voice. Something in us still relaxes when we hear a story told, not just read. We are built for it. It is the original interface. If myth is the first recording device, then storytellers are its keepers. Like all recordings, myths can distort over time. Generations of retelling can warp details, combine events, add flourishes, drop inconvenient elements. But in this distortion, there is a kind of resilience. The story bends so that it can continue to be told, instead of breaking and being lost. The result is that what survives is not always the literal fact, but the shape of the truth, the arc, the emotional logic. That is often more durable than date and place. This is why myths from very different cultures can be so similar without being identical. Each one is a local variation of a more ancient melody, different instruments, same tune. Everywhere we look, that tune emerges. A world brought forth from chaos, a first age of closeness with the divine, a fall, a flood, a second beginning, a teacher or savior, a promise or warning, a future return. These are not random decorations. They are the core grammar of our oldest memory. When archaeologists decode an inscription that matches an oral tale, or when a myth aligns with a newly discovered geological event, it feels as if we're hearing an echo become a voice. Two-channel story and evidence come into phase. And in those moments, something remarkable happens. Ancient people cease to be primitive in our imagination. They become what they always were, Observers, rememberers, interpreters people, doing with their tools what we do with ours. The difference is not in the desire to understand, but in the dialect. In that sense, the storytellers of old were not only preserving the memory of events, they were preserving the memory of a way of thinking, a recognition that knowledge is strongest when it is woven into identity. You don't just know a story, you are part of it. It tells you who you are. The first civilization, if it existed, might have built its continuity on exactly this insight. Its knowledge may have been taught not as dry instruction, but as sacred narrative. When that civilization fell, those stories would have become the only surviving threads. As centuries rolled by, the threads tangled. New experiences were stitched in. Old symbols were reinterpreted. What remained was no longer a clear chronicle, but a rich, layered mythos. To us, it can look like fantasy. But beneath the dragons and thunderbolts, there may be outlines of rivers and mountains, of stars and cities, of people who were once real. The idea of deep time memory suggests that some part of the human mind is capable of holding these outlines for longer than we typically imagine. They may not persist in perfect clarity, but they persist enough to give us the strange sensation when we read an ancient myth or stand before a megalith that we've been here before. We might call that sensation resonance. The story vibrates at a frequency that something inside us recognizes. The storytellers of the old world may not have had words for quantum fields or geological epochs, but they understood resonance in a different way. They knew how to tell stories that would lodge in the psyche so deeply they would be impossible to completely erase. Every time we retell one of those myths now in a book, a film, a whispered conversation, we are participating in that same continuity. We are, without fully realizing it, helping a memory tens of thousands of years old remain alive. The form changes. Clay tablet, vellum, paperback, pixel. The voice changes. A priest, a grandmother, a narrator, an AI. But the underlying function is the same. We are keeping something that matters from falling all the way into silence. If the first civilization's true legacy was not its buildings or tools, but its method of memory, then we are its descendants whether we know it or not. Every storyteller, every listener is part of that inheritance. And somewhere, beyond words, in the shared human capacity to be moved by the same old stories, that inheritance is still at work. As we trace these tales through different cultures, a new layer emerges, not only in the sound of the stories, but in their shapes, in the symbols that keep repeating even when the language shifts. That brings us to another kind of memory altogether, not held in voice or in stone, but in image. A visual grammar older than writing, older than speech as we know it. A language of symbols that may be the most ancient remnant of all. Before there were words, there were shapes. Long before humans traced letters or numbers, before grammar hardened into rules, we were already drawing. The first expressions of thought that survived were not sentences carved neatly into stone. They were marks. A hand outlined on a cave wall. A spiral etched into rock. Lines of dots, ladders, zigzags, circles. These were not random decorations. They were the earliest visible traces of a language older than speech, the language of symbol. The first record of human memory is not verbal, but visual. When you look at those marks in ancient caves and on scattered stones, you're seeing the beginnings of a system designed to hold meaning across time without needing a spoken explanation. A silent code that could outlast voices. That visual language never really vanished. It evolved. It wove itself into myth, into art, into sacred architecture. It became the hidden grammar behind temples, mandalas, petroglyphs, and ritual objects. And remarkably, the same basic set of symbols, spirals, serpents, circles, crosses, trees, appears in cultures that never met. It is as though humanity has been carrying on a single silent conversation across continents, using a shared set of shapes that don't require translation because they speak to something deeper than culture, pattern recognition itself. The consistency is startling. A spiral carved into stone at Newgrange in Ireland tens of thousands of years ago strongly resembles spirals etched at Nazca in Peru, spirals painted on Australian rock, spirals in the petroglyphs of the American Southwest. Local meanings vary. Water, the sun, life force, journey. But underneath, the essence is motion, continuity, growth, return. The spiral feels like a picture of memory itself, always turning, never quite repeating, revisiting the same direction from a higher vantage. The serpent is another symbol that winds through human imagination everywhere. In Mesoamerica, the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl combines snake and bird earth and sky. In Egypt, cobras crown the brows of gods and pharaohs, symbols of power and protection. In Aboriginal Australia, the rainbow serpent carries stories of creation and water. In India, coiled snakes rest at the base of the spine as kundalini, sleeping energy. Sometimes the serpent is fearsome, a dragon to be slain. Sometimes it is wise, a healer, a guardian of thresholds. Often it is both. But its fundamental form is always the same, a line that bends, coils, transforms, a living version of a wave. In Greece, the Ouroboros serpent eating its own tail comes to represent infinity and self-renewal. In Norse myth, the world serpent Jörmungandr circles the entire earth, holding it together. It's hard not to see in these images an ancient intuition about cycles and continuity, but also about energy. Something that flows, returns, and changes state without disappearing. The sun is another universal. Drawn as a disk with rays, or a dot inside a circle, it shines across every mythology. To the Egyptians, it was Ra's burning bark. To the Inca, Inti, father of kings. To the early peoples of Europe, a great turning wheel whose spokes mock the seasons. A simple circle divided into 4 parts. Cross within a wheel shows up carved in stone and wood from Scandinavia to North America to Asia. It can represent the yearly cycle of solstices and equinoxes, the 4 directions, the 4 elements. It's a cosmogram and a calendar at once, a compact diagram of a world ordered in repeating cycles. Researchers sometimes call these recurring shapes the global symbolic set. They make up a kind of archetypal alphabet that predates writing. They arise so often and in such similar contexts that coincidence feels less likely than inheritance. It's tempting to explain everything through Jungian archetypes, universal forms emerging from the structure of the human mind. That is probably part of the answer, but the way these symbols are used, especially at sacred sites and in myths that also encode real astronomical or ecological knowledge, suggests they may be something more. Fragments of a visual language designed to store and transmit information. Think of symbols as fossils of thought. A spiral alone won't tell you the entire organism that carried it, but it will show you the shape of some part how that culture understood time, flow, transformation. Many of these symbols appear tens of thousands of years before writing. They seem to have carried meaning long before anyone carved words. In caves like Lascaux and Chauvet in France, painted around 17,000, 30,000 years ago, we see magnificent horses and bison, but also abstract signs, rows of dots, branching shapes, ladder-like figures, Y marks. The same signs reappear in caves thousands of miles apart. Some researchers argue these formed an early system for marking mating seasons, migrations, or other recurring events. If so, then symbolic notation. The visual seed of writing emerged far earlier than we used to think. If the first civilization inherited and refined such a system, it may have expanded it into a full symbolic science, a way to encode cosmology, mathematics, and philosophy not through long texts, but through combination of shapes and proportions. When that civilization faded, the system would have fractured. Pieces of it would survive as religious iconography, esoteric diagrams, architectural blueprints, and motifs we still use without understanding their original depth. Consider the world tree, a single vertical axis connecting heaven, earth, and the underworld. In Norse myth, Yggdrasil is an immense ash tree holding together 9 realms. Among the Maya, the ceiba tree rises from the center of the world, its roots and branches binding layers of existence. In India, the Ashwatha tree is said to be rooted in heaven and growing downward. In Egypt, a stylized pillar, the Djed, represents stability, sometimes linked to the spine of Osiris, sometimes to a cosmic support. Different images, same structure, a vertical line tying together different dimensions. It might be purely metaphorical, but it can also be read as a model of unity of forces or realms that appear separate, but are expressions of a single underlying axis. The idea of an axis mundi, the world axis, appears everywhere. Symbolically, it suggests that reality is layered but connected, that there is a route of flow between conceptually higher and lower domains. In modern language, we might speak of gradients, fields, or dimensions. To a people mapping their world with symbol, a vertical tree or pillar could serve as both theology and physics, an image of gravity, of energetic flow, of the way information or influence moves between planes. The circle divided into 4, or the wheel and cross, offers another example. It maps the solstices and equinoxes, the 4 cardinal directions, the nature of balance and opposition. From the medicine wheels of the Plains tribes to Celtic crosses, from Buddhist Dharma wheels to Chinese directional diagrams, it reappears with the same core idea: the world as a structured interplay of complementary forces. The earliest writing systems, Egyptian hieroglyphs, early Chinese characters, Proto-Sinaitic signs, Indus symbols, sit halfway between image and abstraction. A bird can be both a bird and a sound. A wave can be both water and a syllable. This hybrid language likely grew out of an even older symbolic system. Numbers, too, carry symbolic weight that transcends culture. 1 often represents unity, source, the unbroken whole. 2, duality, light and dark, day and night, subject and object. 3, balance and synthesis, beginning, middle, end, birth, life, death. 4, structure and stability, the 4 corners of the earth, the legs of a table, the seasons. These associations appear in myths and architecture, in ritual. The Pythagoreans in Greece believed numbers were the true essence of reality. They weren't inventing that idea from scratch. They were inheriting and formalizing something that had already seeped into temple layouts and chants for millennia. When Plato wrote that architecture should reflect the order of the cosmos, he was echoing Egyptian and Babylonian thought. In India, the Vedic texts describe the entire universe as built according to sacred measures and proportions. To build a temple was to recreate the cosmos in miniature. If the first civilization codified this idea, geometry would have been its main language. Circles, squares, and triangles would not be arbitrary. They would be storyboard frames for fundamental principles. The circle, infinite, unbroken, without edge or center visible. The square, material reality, boundaries, balance, the human world. The triangle, relationship, ascent, or descent, the bridge between 2 poles. Combine them, and you get patterns that wander through artifacts worldwide, circles within squares, triangles inside circles, intersecting grids. We still feel their power without being told why. Even a child intuitively senses that a circle suggests wholeness, a spiral suggests motion, a jagged line suggests disruption. These responses may be rooted not only in individual perception, but in cultural memory, shapes that have been loaded with meaning for so long that we inherit the responses like reflexes. Archaeologists have cataloged recurrent abstract signs in Paleolithic art dots, chevrons, grids, spirals, branching lines, and found that the same small set of motifs appears over and over across distant regions. They might have denoted seasons, dangers, resources, or rituals. Whatever their specific dictionary, the important point is that there was a dictionary, a pre-verbal code. If the first civilization tracked the stars, calibrated monuments, understood ratios and cycles, it probably used such symbols to teach and transmit. A circle with a dot could indicate the sun and also the concept of center. A serpent could signify both a literal animal and the idea of flowing energy. A tree might map lineage as well as cosmology. When that civilization collapsed, its symbolic system wouldn't have vanished overnight. It would have become mythologized. Images once used for technical teaching promoted into the realm of the sacred. Traces of this process linger in later esoteric traditions: alchemy, mysticism, certain branches of astrology and sacred geometry, which claim to be decoding an older wisdom hidden in emblem and diagram. The alchemists Ouroboros, the Hermetic Caduceus, the mandalas of the East, the rose windows of cathedrals, each is a multi-layered symbol, part art, part math, part theology. They speak simultaneously to eye, mind, and intuition. Modern science, for all its differences, circles similar shapes: spiral galaxies, vortices in fluids, waveforms in physics, the double helix of DNA, fractals in clouds and ferns. When we draw diagrams of energy fields or gravitational wells, we use curves, loops, and nested shapes that wouldn't look entirely out of place on a temple wall. It's as if nature itself speaks in this symbolic language, and humans, responding to the same patterns in sky and stone, developed a shared visual vocabulary long before formal equations. When we find these symbols at ancient sites, we often label them ornamental because we no longer understand their full function. But they might once have been compressed sentences, even whole stories. A spiral carved above a doorway might have indicated that the building aligned with a specific celestial cycle. A serpent along a temple base might have signaled the connection to water tables or telluric currents. A world tree image might have anchored a region's entire cosmological teaching in a single, memorable icon. If we could fully decode the syntax of that older symbolic language, we might realize that many ancient sites are not just pretty, but legible. As it stands, we can at least recognize that these symbols are not isolated. They come in constellations, spirals with serpents, trees with suns, wheels with crosses. Together they form a kind of visual chorus that repeats the same themes: cycles, balance, connection, transformation, layered reality. Across thousands of years and thousands of miles, the same handful of shapes keeps returning. Either human creativity is unimaginably conservative, or all of us are, in some way, still remembering the same basic picture of the world. That is perhaps the most important point. The language of symbols does not belong to any one civilization. It belongs to the human relationship with pattern itself. It is how we hide understanding in forms that can survive when languages change and libraries burn. The next time you see an ancient carving a spiral on a stone, a coiled serpent, a circle with 4 arms, imagine it speaking, not in words, but in recognition. Someone, long ago, saw what you see. They felt something meaningful in that shape and wanted it remembered. They may have been encoding star paths, planting seasons, or truths about change and return. They may have been preserving a glimpse of a worldview so integrated that it is difficult for us to imagine. What remains to us are these bones of thought-bare outlines of a larger organism. Follow those outlines long enough, and they lead to a frontier where myth and measurement meet. A place where the symbolic language of our ancestors and the formal language of science begin to overlap. Where old shapes mapped on cave walls start to resemble equations on whiteboards. Where we can cautiously ask, were the myths right in their own dialect about some things we only now begin to prove? That is where our path turns next, to the point where imagination and investigation finally sit down at the same table, where science, after a long journey away from story, starts to listen to myth again and discovers, to its quiet surprise, that some of the oldest memories might have been describing reality all along. There comes a moment in any story when simple curiosity sharpens into inquiry, when wondering shifts into the urge to test, to examine, to see if what we feel might also be shown. For most of recent history, we've been taught to see science and myth as opposites. Myth, we're told, is about belief. Science is about proof. One deals in gods and metaphors, the other in data and equations. But both begin in the same place, not knowing. Both are attempts to describe the world and our place in it. Myth does this through story and image. Science does it through pattern and measure. One preserves meaning, the other structure. And sometimes, after a long enough time, their paths cross again. We often forget that science itself grew out of a mythic landscape. The earliest astronomers were temple priests. The first healers were shamans and ritual specialists. The roots of chemistry lie in alchemy, where experimentation sat side by side with symbolism. For the people who first tried to understand the heavens, there was no firm line between sacred and empirical. The same hands that carved star-aligned temples also measured shadow lengths and tracked solstice risings. Their myths were not separate from their observations, they were frameworks for them. As our tools improved, lenses, clocks, telescopes, microscopes, we began to formalize the process. We separated myth from measurement and named the latter science. Yet when scientists turned their methods toward the natural world, they found something unexpected. Beneath many old stories, there were grains of literal truth. Take the flood myths that swirl through every continent. For a long time, these were filed as parables about sin and renewal, moral tales dressed in catastrophe. Then geology, glaciology, and paleoclimatology matured. Ice cores, sediment layers, and submerged river channels revealed that at the end of the Ice Age, sea levels did indeed rise abruptly. Massive pulses of meltwater surged into the oceans. Entire low-lying regions drowned. The timeline of some of these events overlaps strikingly with traditional dates for great deluges. What we once dismissed as purely symbolic begins to look a lot like reportage events so overwhelming that they burn themselves into cultural memory. Or consider the ancient obsession with the sky. Egyptian pyramids aligned to key stars. Mayan priests tracking Venus with uncanny precision. Stone circles marking sunrise and moonrise lines. For centuries, people shrugged and spoke vaguely of primitive astrology or sun cults. Then archaeologists and astronomers put numbers to those alignments. They discovered that many monoliths and temples weren't just vaguely pointed upward, but precisely oriented to solstices, equinoxes, lunar standstills, even long-term cycles like precession. These structures functioned as observatories and calendars. The ancients were not simply stargazers wrapped in superstition. They were scientists of the sky using the tools they had: stone, patience, and long memory. Ancient medicine tells a similar story. Early healers wrapped their treatments in ritual and prayer. To us, that can look like superstition, yet the plants they used often contained real active compounds. Willow bark, used to ease pain in many cultures, contains salicin, the basis of aspirin. Moldy substances applied to wounds, in some traditions, anticipated the idea of antibiotics. Fermented brews and herbal mixtures had complex biochemical effects. The incantations might have been spiritual cushioning. But the pharmacopoeia was empirical, refined over generations by observation. This worked. That didn't. Myth kept track of what worked, embedding it in stories of gifts from gods of healing. In these cases and others, myth acted as long-term storage, while the explicit reasoning faded. The file names, the stories, survived when the source code, the detailed explanations, did not. When modern science finally asks the same questions in its own language, it often finds that myth was pointing to real phenomena all along. creation myths too, sometimes echo patterns that physics is only now describing, albeit in very different terms. Egyptian tales of Atum rising from primeval waters to bring forth light. Hindu stories of Brahma breathing out universes and inhaling them again. Norse sagas of a giant whose body is disassembled to make the world. These are not scientific accounts, but they carry themes modern cosmology mirrors. A universe emerging from an undifferentiated state, matter forming from a single source, cycles of expansion and contraction. The likeness is not proof of hidden equations in old temples. It is a reminder that humans, confronted with the same deep questions, often arrive at structurally similar answers. That everything comes from one something, that the world as we know it is not permanent, that creation and destruction are intertwined. As science has probed deeper into reality, something interesting has happened. The language of physics and cosmology has begun to sound, in its own way, mythic. Quantum particles that are nowhere and everywhere until observed. Entangled pairs influencing each other across distance as if tied by invisible threads. Space-time warping like fabric. Matter dissolving into energy, then into pure information. These are not deities and dragons, but they are weird, counterintuitive, and invisible to everyday sense, much like the unseen forces myth once gave names and faces to. Our modern stories about them are couched in math instead of metaphor, but they are still stories models that help our minds grasp what the raw data points toward. From this angle, science and myth look less like enemies and more like estranged siblings. Myth holds the emotional and moral memory. Science reconstructs the mechanical picture. When they overlap, the result is a fuller view. The flood becomes both an event and a lesson. The world tree becomes both a cosmogram and a metaphor for interconnected systems. The sky gods become both narrative figures and hints of ancestral teachers. As scientific instruments grow more sensitive, they keep validating parts of what myth has guarded. Aboriginal dreaming stories match ancient shorelines. Polynesian navigation chants map real currents and constellation paths. Temple layouts encode solstitial and lunar cycles we can verify with software. Even large-scale patterns, once dismissed as mystical, begin to find modern analogs. The idea of the universe as an interconnected whole sounds mystical until we look at ecological networks, quantum entanglement, and emergent systems. The old phrase, as above, so below, from Hermetic tradition, sounds less fanciful when we see fractal repetition across scales from tree branches to river deltas to galaxies. Myth, in these cases, wasn't doing measurement. It was doing pattern recognition. It saw resemblances, resonances, and encoded them in story. Science later takes those patterns and quantifies them. The scientific method: observe, hypothesize, test, refine, may look new, but its skeleton mirrors older narrative patterns. It's not unlike the hero's journey in myth, a call to adventure, question, trials, experiments, confrontation with the unknown, results, and a return with new knowledge, theory, to share with the community. The forms differ, but the underlying human activity is similar. Venturing into uncertainty to bring back something that changes how we live. What makes our current moment unusual is that the tools of science are now sensitive enough, and our archives rich enough, that we can begin to test elements of very old stories directly. We can date floods, map ancient coastlines, simulate sky patterns from 10,000 years ago, sequence DNA to trace migrations. And often, when we do, we find that myth and measurement rhyme. This doesn't mean every legend is literal. It does mean that we should be wary of dismissing all of them as fantasy. Many may be stylized accounts of real events, encoded, adorned, and repurposed, but anchored in something that happened. The idea that early people could have tracked the slow wobble of Earth's axis, precession, seemed absurd to many scholars until evidence mounted that various cultures did, in fact, reference long cycles of thousands of years tied to stellar shifts. To detect those requires either continuous observation over many generations or the inheritance of very old records. When modern astronomy confirms that such cycles exist, and then we find them echoed in myth, it underscores the point. Our ancestors were doing serious sky science, and their stories carried the results forward. Perhaps the most profound reconciliation between myth and science lies in their shared recognition of connection. Myth spoke of an animate universe, a world where stones, rivers, winds, and stars participated in a living whole. Science, after centuries of reductionism, is now revealing a universe of interactions and relationships where nothing exists in complete isolation. Ecology shows us that every organism exists within networks. Physics shows us that particles influence each other across vast scales. Neuroscience suggests that our perception of separateness is constructed, not absolute. In that light, ancient statements like, "The world is one body," begin to look less naive and more prescient. They weren't wrong. They were just speaking in poetry. If there was a first civilization that held a more unified view, where myth and proto-science were one cloth, then the split we made later between rational and irrational might be an artifact of our own era, not a fundamental necessity. We may now be circling back toward a more integrated perspective, using the rigor of science without abandoning the depth of story. When we do this, when we let myth suggest questions and let science test them, we find ourselves in a more spacious kind of knowing. The old stories become hypotheses, not to be believed blindly, but to be investigated respectfully. Where myth speaks of a great flood, we ask, what physical events might this remember? Where myth speaks of a lost golden age, we ask, could there have been a period of climatic or cultural stability now faintly recalled? Where myth speaks of teachers from the sky, we ask, what kind of contact or inheritance could that represent? Sometimes the answer will be, no physical correlate found. Sometimes it will be, not yet. And sometimes quietly, it will be, yes, there is something here. In those yes moments, the distance between us and our ancestors shrinks. Their world becomes less alien. Their myths become less childish. We begin to see them as we see ourselves, as people doing the best they could to understand. If myth is humanity's dream state and science its waking analysis, we are living in a time when those two modes are beginning to converse again. The dreams are remembering their episodes. The waking mind is learning to listen without contempt. In that overlap, we might catch sight of the shadow of the first civilization, not just as ruins under the sea, but as a style of consciousness that understood story and measurement as partners. Which brings us to one of the most persistent and most magnetic of all old stories. A tale that refuses to disappear, no matter how many times it is dismissed. It sits at the crossroads of myth and investigation, of longing and skepticism. It is the story of a lost world, a highly developed society swallowed by water, whose memory has haunted us for more than 2,000 years. We have given it many forms and faces, but most of us know it by a single enduring name, Atlantis. Every civilization carries within it a dream of a lost world, a place of balance, beauty, and understanding that came before the troubles of the present. A world that feels not invented, but remembered. For much of our modern culture, that dream has gathered around a single name, Atlantis. The word has become shorthand for something larger than any one story. When we say Atlantis, we don't just mean a city under the sea. We mean the idea of a first civilization, a society older and more advanced in certain ways than the ones we know, destroyed by catastrophe, yet refusing to vanish from memory. Interestingly, Atlantis doesn't come to us from the most ancient texts we have. It appears relatively late in the works of Plato around 360 BCE in two dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. There, Plato describes Atlantis as an island empire lying beyond the Pillars of Heracles, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. Larger than Libya and Asia Minor combined, rich in resources and metals, temperate and fertile, organized with care. Its capital, he says, was a set of concentric rings of land and water, with grand temples and palaces. Its people were strong, skilled, and at first, just. They descended from a union between gods and mortals and were entrusted with a high level of wisdom and power. But in time, their virtue slipped. They became greedy, warlike, and arrogant. They turned away from the divine order that had once guided them. In response, according to Plato, the gods sent earthquakes and floods that sank the island in a single terrible day and night, leaving only mud and shoals where a great realm had once been. Plato insists he isn't inventing all this. He claims the story comes from Solon, a respected Athenian lawgiver who, during a visit to Egypt, heard it from priests in the city of Sais. Those priests, he says, told Solon that the events had occurred 9,000 years before their meeting, putting Atlantis near the end of the last ice age. For Plato, Atlantis serves as a lesson in the dangers of hubris and the cyclical nature of human virtue and decline. But for those who came after him, it became a puzzle. If he was reporting a real tradition, could there have been a historical core, a civilization destroyed by rising seas, whose memory reached Greece through Egypt? Over the centuries, that question has refused to go away. Scholars, explorers, mystics, and novelists have all taken turns at it. They have placed Atlantis in the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, the Andes, Antarctica, even under the Sahara. They have described it as a continent, an island chain, a coastal empire. The details change, but the core remains. An advanced culture, undone suddenly, remembered vaguely. What makes Plato's account stand out from many other myths is its density of detail. He provides measurements for the island and its city, describes mountain ranges, plains, and harbors. He talks about canals, horse races, metal-lined temples, and an alloy called orichalcum, a gleaming reddish gold metal ranked second only to gold in value. He outlines a political system of 10 kings bound by shared law, whose decrees are etched into pillars. He frames Atlantis not as a utopia, but as a real, flawed society that rose, shone, and fell. This specificity has always been double-edged. To some, it proves Plato made the whole thing up as a philosophical parable. To others, it suggests he was drawing on a tradition that contained far more detail than a simple morality tale would require. The timeline he gives, around 9,000 years before his own timelands, close to the transition between the Pleistocene and Holocene, when ice sheets melted rapidly and sea levels surged. It also loosely aligns with the rough dates proposed for dramatic climate events like the Younger Dryas. To many who are open to the idea of earlier civilizations, that alignment is hard to ignore. If ever there was a time for an advanced coastal culture to be wiped away by water, that era would have been it. But Atlantis is not alone. The motif of a lost land, an earlier realm of harmony destroyed by ocean or fire, recurs all over the world under different names. The Greeks had not only Atlantis but also Hyperborea, a land of perpetual light in the far north, inhabited by long-lived, peaceful people. Hindu and Buddhist traditions speak of Shambhala, a hidden kingdom of enlightened beings existing beyond ordinary geography. Celtic lore remembers Avalon, an isle of healing and timelessness just beyond the mists. The Egyptians spoke of Zep Tepi, the first time when gods and humans shared the earth before a great flood and a reset. In Tamil traditions from South India, there is the memory of Kumari Kandam, a sunken landmass south of the subcontinent where a great civilization once thrived before the sea claimed it. In Polynesia, many island cultures preserve stories of ancestral homelands that sank, forcing migrations across the ocean. These stories differ in their surface details, but the skeleton is familiar, a special place set apart, a people living in a state of relative balance or advanced knowledge, a fall or a flood, flight and dispersal, a lingering promise or ache. Atlantis became the most famous of these in the West, partly because Plato's writings survived and were copied, while others were buried in scripts and languages fewer people read. But the dream is bigger than his version. It is global. Modern archaeology, cautious by training, does not accept Atlantis as a proven historical site. The evidence we have for specific proposed locations is always incomplete, ambiguous, or heavily debated. That caution is healthy. Many wild claims have been made on thin grounds. Yet, if we step back from the name Atlantis and look instead at the pattern, a relatively advanced coastal or island culture destroyed by abrupt sea level rise at the end of the Ice Age, leaving behind only fragments inland, the idea becomes less outrageous. It becomes a plausible scenario. We know that vast tracts of land that were once dry are now continental shelves. Doggerland, a region that once joined Britain to mainland Europe, was flooded gradually and then more suddenly. Sunderland, the enlarged Southeast Asian landmass that once joined many islands, was likewise cut up by rising seas. Similar stories played out along the edges of every continent. It would almost be more surprising if no complex cultures had arisen on any of those drowned lands. Some scattered clues may hint at such vanished coastal societies. Off the Gulf of Kumari in India, sonar scans and dives have revealed what appear to be geometric patterns and stone formations at depths indicating submergence thousands of years before the Indus Valley cities. Near Yonaguni in Japan, the stepped, terraced structures under the water have sparked decades of debate over natural versus artificial origin. In the Bahamas, the so-called Bimini Road has been cited by some as evidence of ancient construction, though others argue it is entirely natural. On land, the sudden emergence of monumental sites like Gobekli Tepe, not long after sea levels stabilized, is intriguing. It's as if people who had once known how to build gathered inland and began reconstructing with the materials and circumstances available to them, elements of an older tradition. Viewed through this lens, Atlantis might not be a single island with a precise GPS coordinate. It might be a composite memory, a story assembled from scattered recollections of multiple drowned regions and fallen cities. Plato could have inherited and crystallized that composite into a single narrative, anchored to a name. The moral arc of his Atlantis, the fall due to arrogance, also resonates with something timeless. He suggests that the Atlanteans were brought low, not just by fate, but by their own choices, by moving out of harmony with a higher order. Strip away the specific gods, and you're left with a pattern. When a civilization loses its balance between power and wisdom, nature or reality eventually pushes back. It's a lesson we find echoed in myths everywhere. Excess draws correction. Exploitation invites collapse. The greater the height, the harder the fall. Atlantis becomes, therefore, not just a story of what may have happened once, but a mirror we hold up to ourselves. That, perhaps, is why the story refuses to die. It isn't just about sunken stones. It's about a feeling that we are living in the echo of something, and that our choices could set us on a similar path. Atlantis has been reimagined in every age to suit the concerns of the time. In the Renaissance, it became a symbol of ideal political and social order. In the Enlightenment, it was tied to dreams of rational utopia. In the 19th and 20th centuries, it morphed through occult movements and speculative pseudoscience into everything from a lost technological super race to a cautionary example of racial myth-making. Beneath these shifting projections, however, one thing remains consistent: the sense of a lost alignment. A world where knowledge and nature, technology, and spirituality were not as sharply divided as they are now. Perhaps Atlantis endures in our imagination because we are still looking for that alignment, trying to remember what balance feels like. If we treat the Atlantis story not as a map, but as a memory trace, it points toward a simple, powerful possibility: that civilization, in some recognizable form, is older than our history books admit. That humans reached levels of complexity and understanding before the Holocene that we have not yet fully uncovered. That the story of us does not begin with Sumer and Egypt, but with something else, older and more fluid, of which only myths like Atlantis remain. Archaeology is slowly, cautiously, catching up with this broader view. Discoveries of earlier and earlier sites, more complex than expected, nudge the start line of sophisticated culture backward in time. Evidence of long-distance trade, of shared motifs and techniques, suggests that ancient people traveled and connected more than we once assumed. In that context, Atlantis is less a fantasy than a symbol of a missing chapter. It might represent the last flourishing of a pre-flood world, or it might be a patchwork of memories from many such worlds. In either case, its persistence hints that humanity collectively knows at some level that our story is incomplete. The ocean, with its vast dark depths, becomes the physical metaphor of that incompleteness. We can map its surface, but what lies on its floor is still only partially known. Sonar and remote submersibles are our new myths, probing where stories once did. We have found canyons, mountain ranges, strange life forms, and, in a few places, submerged structures that stir old questions. Yet the majority of the seafloor remains effectively unexplored. It is entirely possible that pieces of our own early history lie hidden there, untouched. But whether or not we ever find a city that perfectly matches Plato's dimensions, Atlantis will continue to matter because it is more than geography. It is an idea, an axis where memory, warning, and hope intersect. It reminds us that civilizations can end, that knowledge can be lost, that seas can rise. It also suggests that what is lost can, in some form, be remembered, if only as a dream that will not let go. And this brings us to a quieter, more unsettling implication. If Atlantis represents an earlier cycle of human achievement and collapse, then we are not standing at the start of history, but somewhere in the middle of a recurring pattern. In that pattern, our task may not be to surpass the past in raw power, but to remember, more fully this time, how to marry power with balance, how not to become our own Atlantis. As the image of the lost island fades out of focus, we're left not with disappointment, but with continuity. We too are part of the same story, a civilization with great potential, living in a time of climatic shift, standing at the edge of possible forgetting. And just as Plato once used the memory of Atlantis to hold a mirror to Athens, we can use it to hold a mirror to ourselves. Because if Atlantis was the first civilization, or at least the last bright echo of one, then we may be its latest reflection writing new chapters in the same long unfinished book. From here, the journey naturally turns from that single symbol back out to the whole tapestry, the endless story that began before any of our surviving records, that has flowed through every myth and discovery since, and that is still being written in us. The story of how humanity remembers itself. Stories never really end. They only trade one voice for another. Each generation picks up the thread where the last one let it fall, weaving inherited memory into new patterns of meaning. What we call history is just the part of that weaving we can see dates, events, monuments. Beneath it, quieter but continuous, runs another layer, the story that never stopped. The one that began before anything was written down, before stone cities, before the first grand forgetting. It is the story of how humanity remembers itself. If you look closely, you can feel that continuity everywhere. In creation, myths, and end-time visions. In half-ruined temples and circles of stone. In recurring symbols, spirals, serpents, suns, trees. These are not random artifacts. They are verses from the same long song. The melody shifts and modulates, but the rhythm, the pulse of asking and answering, of losing and finding, endures. It moves through language, through architecture, through ritual and science, through the way we keep turning our gaze to the night sky and asking the same questions over and over. Who are we? Where did we come from? What came before us? If some first civilization once flourished and fell, its story did not vanish. It changed form. It flowed into everything that followed. Even now, in a world of satellites and fiber optic cables, that old impulse remains. We still build monuments to understanding, though they look different. Our pyramids are observatories and particle accelerators, data centers and space telescopes. Instead of aligning stones with the stars, we align sensors and mirrors in machines. Yet the purpose is strikingly familiar: to see the structure of reality more clearly, to find pattern in vastness. The telescopes that map galaxies are heirs to the first stone circles. The labs that probe the fabric of matter carry on the same curiosity that once traced animal tracks and the changing phases of the moon. The tools have changed, the questions have not. What's remarkable is how much our most advanced discoveries resemble, in structure if not in detail, things old myths were hinting at. Modern cosmology tells us that the universe is a single unfolding event, a continuous expansion from an initial, incomprehensibly dense state. Many traditions spoke of a single breath, a single word, a single sound from which everything came forth. Quantum physics tells us that everything that exists is, at bottom, vibration and relationship fields interacting, waves resolving into patterns. Ancient wisdom spoke of a world woven from a subtle fabric, of a music underlying form, of a word or song sustaining existence. Systems science and ecology show that everything is connected, that no living thing exists apart from its networks. Myths of the world tree, of the cosmic ocean, of the great web, all describe something similar, a reality in which nothing is truly separate. It's not that ancient people knew quarks or DNA. It's that, by living with close attention, they saw and felt the unity that our equations now describe in a different idiom. In that sense, the story is not moving from falsehood to truth, but from one language of truth to another. The idea of a first civilization, then, is not just about stones under the sea. It's about continuity of insight. About the possibility that humanity has touched certain deep understandings more than once, losing and regaining them in cycles. When a culture falls, its libraries may burn and its buildings crumble. But its essential realizations, its sense of how things fit together, do not evaporate. They sink into myth, ritual, symbol, habit. They migrate into the subconscious of later ages. Centuries or millennia later, they re-emerge as new philosophies or scientific theories. Every time we rediscover something profound, there is often a strange feeling of familiarity, as though we are not so much inventing as recalling. When we learn that the earth is round, that the cosmos is vast, that time is relative, that life is one branching tree, some deep part of us nods. Of course, we've felt this before somehow. That feeling might be more than poetic. It could be the echo of older moments when similar recognitions dawned. Our particular era has an unusual feature. We are able, for the first time, to see our own story at a planetary scale. We can trace migrations with genetics, climate shifts with ice cores, language families with comparative linguistics. We can overlay myth maps on geological maps and see where they align. We can date monuments and floods and trace precession and cycles with high precision. In doing so, we are starting to glimpse history, not as a straight ladder, but as a series of spirals. Civilizations rising, integrating knowledge, overreaching, falling, and seeding the next cycle with what they learned. In that perspective, the so-called first civilization is simply the earliest we remember. There may have been others even further back, erased almost completely by time and geology. The Earth is old, and the record we can access is partial at best. But whether there was one such civilization or many, their memory survives in us, not just in ruins or in myths, but in our instincts. We still feel compelled to align our lives with cycles to mark solstices and New Year's, to honor beginnings and endings, to create rituals around transitions. We still respond to geometry and proportion in ways that go beyond aesthetics. A well-balanced building, a harmonious melody, a satisfying story all seem to fit something inside us. We still experience awe when we look up at the stars, the same stars that watched over the builders at Gobekli Tepe in Giza, over the storytellers of Sumer and the navigators of Polynesia. The constellations have shifted slightly due to precession, but the sky's essential face is the same. Our questions under that sky are as old as we are. Progress, then, might be less about leaving the past behind and more about recovering, refining, and expanding what has always been possible for us to know. Our instruments extend our senses. Our models get more precise. But the core mystery, the fact that anything exists at all, that we are here to witness it, remains as astonishing as ever. If there is a direction to the story, it may be toward integration, the reunion of knowing and meaning, of measurement and wisdom. The first civilization may have had a version of this integration. We may be slowly, clumsily, moving toward another. That integration matters now more than ever. We have access to tremendous power, technological, ecological, informational. But power without context is dangerous. That too is a pattern myth has always warned about. Atlantis, Babel, Icarus, different names for the same lesson. Myth can remind us what data alone cannot, that knowledge is not neutral, that how we use what we know affects the whole, that we are responsible not just for what we build, but for how we fit it into the larger web of life. In the cycles of remembering and forgetting, there are points where a civilization must decide whether it will repeat a pattern or transform it. We may be living at such a point now. The comfort hidden in the idea of cycles is this: forgetting is never complete. Even when we stray, even when we lose our way, some part of the story remembers us. It tugs at us through unease, through dreams, through the persistent feeling that things could be arranged more harmoniously than they are. The builders of the first temples, the tellers of the first great myths, may have felt that pull from their own predecessors. They responded with the tools available to them: stone, story, symbol. We respond with our own: research, technology, art, global conversation. We are not separate from them. We are another expression of the same impulse. When you strip away the changing costumes, the story that remains is simple and profound, a being becoming aware of itself in a vast universe, trying not to forget what it discovers. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes we fail, but the effort itself, the turning of attention, the choice to remember and to share is what keeps the story alive. On clear nights, when we look up, the stars don't appear to move much. Our lives are brief against their slow dance. Yet for as long as any human has existed, those same lights have been there, bearing silent witness to our hopes and fears, our rises and falls. They do not tell us what to do, but they remind us how small we are and how vast the context we belong to is. They invite humility and wonder in equal measure. That combination, humility before the scale of things and wonder at being part of it at all, might be the closest thing we have to a compass that points through every age. The first civilization, however it looked, may have oriented itself by that compass. So can we. In the end, the endless story isn't about a beginning we missed or an ending we fear. It's about the ongoing act of remembering that we are participants in something larger than any one culture, one era, or one species. It's about understanding that myth and science, memory and measurement are not competitors, but co-authors. Each holds part of the truth the other needs. And it's about recognizing that we, right now, are not just readers of the story, but writers. The choices we make, the structures we build, the narratives we pass on, will become someone else's myths, someone else's evidence, someone else's starting point. The first civilization did not truly disappear. It exhaled its knowledge into the world through stone and story. We are, in a sense, the next inhale, drawing those old breaths into new lungs, mixing them with our own, and breathing forward. Somewhere in that rhythm, out-breath and in-breath, forgetting and remembering, the story continues to write itself, quietly, patiently, without rush. It moves through us whether we acknowledge it or not. Each question we ask about our origins, each act of wonder, each attempt to live more gently in a complex world, becomes another line. As long as someone somewhere pauses to look at the sky and feel that ancient combination of smallness and belonging, as long as someone wonders what came before us, the story will not end. It will keep going. Endless, soft-spoken, alive. And in that ongoingness lies a final, quiet reassurance. Whatever was best in the first civilization, their insights, their balance, their sense of connection, was never entirely lost. It has been traveling all this time, through myth and memory, waiting for us to remember that we, too, are part of the same long remembering. We are not just the descendants of the past, we are its continuation. And the story, as always, is still being told.